What if it bumped that control by accident? You'd be mincemeat by now. What have I told you?
All right, I guess I wasn't thinking.
You weren't thinking. You mean you'll work on engines and machinery and not think of your own personal safety? Here, shake hands with danger. What if it bumped that control by accident? You'd be mincemeat by now. What have I told you?
All right, I guess I wasn't thinking.
You weren't thinking. You mean you'll work on engines and machinery and not think of your own personal safety? Here, shake hands with danger.
Hello. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the stream. I'm so sorry the guest has not shown up and it is 10 minutes over, so I'm gonna start something wrong, but I do have a backup plan, as I was telling Ivan in the chat. I hope you're all well. I'm still getting over a cold, so that sucks for me. It's kind of a bit nasally, but I will keep an eye out for Christian if they decide to show up. But what I decided to do was go to their ministry. Hey, BBM, you rock. Love to see you. Hey, Dave, captive desk. It's so good to see you. Yeah, so what I decided to do was go over to the Christians who I'm interviewing, and I will keep an eye out for them if he ever sort of decides to show up. And grab one of his sort of things from there and just go over it. So unable to interview or sort of have a discussion, I think the next best thing is to maybe review and see if we can give one of his sort of, I guess, sermons here a fair shake, I guess. Now let's see. So I went and grabbed this one on perfection, apparently, which the reason why it interested me is because perfection's this it's a weird thing that perfection's like infinity, sorry, right? You don't know, how could you possibly know that you've reached it? Like, how could you possibly know? I think it's one of those concepts that is completely and utterly sort of there's no way to tell if you've ever gotten there. I think it's just a concept that can't actually be achieved in reality. So I more sort of think it as a a abstraction. It's an idea rather than something in and of itself. It's just not achievable. But I sort of wanted to go through this and find out. And I do apologize. This is spur of the moment stuff. This is right off the seat of my pants. I guess I have two options. I either delay the stream for a length amount of time and make people wait, or I find something else to do. And this is the something else to do. So I guess you can probably hear I am disappointed. I was really looking forward to this all week, and sort of I've been sick all week, so this was sort of something that I really was looking forward to. But we will grab my thing here. Okay, so this is from. And I'll just, and obviously the description isn't updated with this because I just grabbed it sort of 2 seconds ago. This is from Highways of Home Ministry, Highways of Home, where I believe Christian is a pastor. He says that Highways of Home is a ministry for projecting the revelation of Christ, Jesus Christ, as the revealed word of God for this present day and hour. We believe in spreading the gospel through preaching, teaching, song, and written messages. We want to win souls for Christ. Okay, so that's their spiel from their YouTube channel. So I want to be fair to them. And go through. Now, this is by George L. Pike, which I would presume to be Christian's father, or perhaps grandfather, maybe. So it's nice that he's reading, because I can hear Christian's dulcet tones reading this. So it's nice that he's reading something by by grandfather. Big Bad Mama is telling me. Okay, cool. Yeah, grandfather. That makes sense. So that's nice. But let's have a look and see what it says. I'll just start it rolling, and maybe we can have some fun and sort of chill out while waiting for Christian. See if we can listen to some of his stuff, I guess.
Holiness unto the Lord. Jesus Christ's Eternal Kingdom of Abundant Life Incorporated presents
Is that coming through?
A sermon by Reverend George Leon Pike Sr., originally printed in the booklet Hidden Manna. Copyright 2007. All rights reserved by George.
Hidden Manna? Did he say Hidden Manna? Hidden Manna. Okay. What is Hidden Manna? Okay, it's a sign of God's generous hospitality and God's presence. Okay, so it's not some kind of, Kool-Aid thing. I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by Big Bad Mama. You're always a problem. You're always a problem. Apparently, it's yeah. So apparently, Hidden Manna is something about hospitality. So it alludes to the the manner when they were crossing the desert. Sounds like something for a. You're not you're not wrong. I needs to be louder if possible. Can I make this louder? Can I in any way make this louder? How would I do that? I would I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can. I could possibly change my system sounds to be louder. There's a possibility. Oops. That's my fault. Sorry.
George L. Pike Sr. Read by Christian Pike. Perfection. In the book
How's
of
that?
Hebrews, we are told by the Apostle Paul that we are to go on to perfection, Hebrews 6:1, to be perfect, that we should come to the fullness of the stature of the perfect man, Christ Jesus. The scriptures state, "Be ye."
Yeah, I'm not sure he was perfect. He did curse a fig tree and flip tables and stuff like that. Like he wasn't like so. Is that so? The whole idea that someone is perfect is I don't know how you'd define that. I don't know how you would say, hey, this is. It seems more like a matter of faith that this personage of the Christ was perfect in every way. I kind of find it hard to think, well, somebody that gets angry at a fig tree for not bearing fruit out of season, so basically blaming the tree is a model of perfection. I think that anybody also that sort of says, hey, if you think about committing adultery, then you've committed adultery. I have trouble with that. But anyway, that's
Be perfect,
yeah.
even as your Father in heaven is perfect, and that no man shall be above his master, but everyone that would be perfect shall be as his master. Christ was the head.
Everyone that is perfect would be as their master. This talk of master, like sort of slaves to Christ, is really worrying for me. Yeah, I always feel troubled when I hear it, sort of thing, that you're supposed to um that you're supposed to um yeah, you're supposed to sort of have obsessions to sort of unthinking sort of subservience to this being. It does concern me.
Or the first member of the body of God. God, the Word or Spirit, manifested in the fleshly body of many members. Christ, through his own righteousness or works, which was God within him, obtained the first and head office of this bodily ministry. We obtain offices as members of the body of Christ through Christ.
Yeah, so you're sort of deriving your authority from this idea that sort of Christ is the head, and then you've got perfection through. Does it have closed captions? I can turn that on. Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm such a professional. I know exactly what I'm doing. I have to get my chat to tell me what to do. It's a gift. I mean, honestly, I'm so sorry, guys. Seriously. Slaves to a mythological character. Yeah, I kind of agree. Even if what they're saying is true, it kind of, I don't think you should be unquestioningly loyal to anybody or anything. Yeah. Good call, Dave. By the way, good call. Like Ian, sorry, Ivan. We're not talking consensually, mate. Come on now. Like, come on now. Yes, I think that anybody who wants to be subservient to another for whatever reason, including if it makes them feel good, is perfectly, that's fine to do. It just worries me when people talk about it like you have a moral responsibility to be subservient. It worries me.
Christ, the Word, prepared a body of many members for the Spirit of God to dwell in. Heaven is his throne, and earth is his footstool. This body is to rule heaven and earth.
Oh, I've heard this verse before. The last flat earth debate I have, that I got told that it was like the earth was literally his footstool, that the earth is flat because it's the top of the footstool. I wish I was joking. I wish so. I mean, Christian probably doesn't take that literally. At least I hope not. But that there are some people that do. There are some people that read that verse that the earth is the footstool and say, well, it must be flat because the top of a stool is flat, which is wow. I don't know what to say to that. Some math can be an abstraction, how it can simply describe reality. Yeah, but abstractions, so we're talking about so abstractions don't exist in the real world. So you don't get a 1 in the real world, right? I get what you mean. Yeah, it describes how sort of things logically work in the world, but numbers and things. Oh, thanks, Big Bad Mama. That's okay. I really appreciate it though. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do have a cold, but yeah, so abstractions, I mean, perfection is fine with abstractions. So you could have the perfect island as an abstraction, right? So an idealized version, and this is the thing about Neoplatonism, that they sort of say, hey, ideal things have to exist somewhere, and everything's just a reflection of that ideal thing. I don't think that ideals exist as concretes in the real world, or perfection exists as a concrete in the real world. I don't know, except for metaphorically, and sort of say, hey, that's perfect for me. I don't know how, and big shout out to Kata. Absolutely adore you. I don't know how you would achieve perfection. And even if you did, I don't know how you'd know that you'd achieve perfection. Yeah, that's the whole ideal of Platonic forms. Absolutely, yes. That there are these ideal perfect forms that everything is derived from. But I whether they think they actually exist as a concrete or not, usually they don't. Usually they still are abstracter.
God will come back after a church without spot or blemish. This means, of course, that each member will be purified, and every member having come.
Purified how? How are they purified? Purified how? I just got to get some details on there, because when religious people start talking about being purified, it can go in many different ways. The language isn't comforting to me. It could be perfectly benign. It could be purified by, sort of oils, or, dousing in water. That's fine. Fire, not so much, like
Come together in its right place will be perfectly whole. We are perfect in the inward man by his works of righteousness.
We are perfect by the inward man by his works of righteousness. Yeah, Kata, that would be probably the scariest one. Oh, I do apologize. We are perfect inwards. Yeah. See, I think that. So I think the danger here is something in psychology called unrelenting standards. It's sort of when you expect too much of yourself, when you expect everything you do and everything you say and everything you do to, every action, every thought to be of a higher standard than what it needs to be. Sort of accepting the fallibility of yourself and the vulnerabilities of yourself and the weaknesses of yourself, as well as the strengths, is what makes a human well. We can accept that of ourselves. And there's sort of a phrase that a psychologist that I knew used to say, and that is good enough is good, right? So it's okay to have flaws and vulnerabilities. It's good to have flaws and vulnerabilities. Like the way that he described it was somebody that doesn't accept anything less than the perfect thing is usually a deeply unhappy and sort of a deeply unhealthy person, somebody that has to get everything right. And so we sort of accept that of ourselves, that we do the best we can, and that's good enough, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But the problem comes in not accepting when you can't do as a good job. And I mean, I experienced that myself. I think everybody does.
The faith of Christ in our hearts is imputed unto us for righteousness, the kingdom of God being within us, and we in it by translation.
So this whole idea of it's something I want to bring up, and it's sort of come up a few times with sort of examining Christian ideology and this whole idea of your heart, and we know now that the heart has nothing to do with what you think and what happens. So I'm not trying to be pedantic, and people say, oh, well, you should know what written on your heart means, or you feel it in your heart. And it's like, well, as a euphemism, sure, I do understand that. I do understand. Oh, thank you, BBM. Yeah, you are a legend. But when you're talking about like your heart, we know that sort of it doesn't do deciding things for you. So I really want to clarify, when they say it's in your heart or written on, do they mean that like that is where it actually lies, like as a even a metaphysical thing? Like is it that where it is? Because a lot of the feelings that we get on our heart are actually, well, they're from the brain. Like, for instance, when you feel in your heart, it's actually the chemicals activating in your brain and causing adrenaline to your heart, kind of thing. Oh, and 1 second.
Mark,
Christian, how you doing?
Man, I am so sorry, Mark. I did not mean to keep you waiting. Please forgive me. Aiden just sent me a text and
That's
reminded
okay.
me. Man, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
I really feel bad.
That's okay. Well, I had like an evil villain. I had a backup plan, and that was to sort of just go on your website and grab something and go through it. So it's no big deal. It's
Man,
no big problem.
Really, I do. I'm sorry. I've been so wide open. I just forgot.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. That's all right. I forgive you. That's okay. You know, it's life gets tumultuous, and it's easy to go, oh man, I've been, this person did this. It's got nothing to do with me, and I've got to remember that.
Buddy, I was looking forward to it. It was just oversight.
Yeah, no, I get you. I get you. It's fine. It's perfectly fine. And you're here now, so that doesn't matter, Christian. That's fine, mate. It's just I think we have a tendency to take things personally. That we go, oh, they're doing this to me, kind of thing. And it's gotten like I do have to remember that it's got nothing to do with me. Like you've just been busy and things like that. So
yeah, James sent me an email too, and I just checked my email. I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. I hope you don't mind me going through some of your church's stuff as well.
Not at all.
Okay, sure. Well, maybe I'll continue that someday and have a look at it, because I mean, there was a few topics brought up we could. But how are you? First off, I hope you're
great.
well.
I've been wide open, man. I think I've told you before, but I'm an evangelist, so we travel to different places to speak. And and I also work doing tile work and paint work and different kinds of remodeling. And so a lot of times, wherever I happen to be at, if I'm ministering at a church over the weekend or something, I'll get with one of the brethren and work a few days throughout the week just to keep me on the road. So my life is very unpredictable in that way. I never know where I'm going to be from one week to the next.
So you're telling me your church has a really nice roof, is what you're saying?
Well,
no?
My church roof right now is the roof of a Kia Sorento. So,
okay, all right. So you're sort of missionary, going around the country and evangelizing to people out of your car. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we travel mostly in Georgia and sometimes the Southeast. I've been into Alabama.
Okay.
I've been in North Carolina, but mostly it's in Georgia.
So what does that look like? What does evangelizing look? Because I've never experienced this phenomenon. I've never had anybody come up to me and go, "Oh, have I ever seen it on the street?" I must admit I don't get out an awful lot, but I don't think I've experienced this. So what does that look like when you're doing that?
Okay, so evangelism in the sense that I do, I mean, there's different routes. There's street preachers and people like that. There's certain organizations that specialize in things like door knocking and stuff. I'm not really into that.
Yeah.
But I travel to different churches and speak to the people at the behest of the pastors. And so a lot of times it's just little country churches, Pentecostal churches or Baptist churches, just kind of little small congregations. I've been to churches that had less than 10 people numbers of times. And so that's usually where I find myself, is little places like that.
Sorry, I had in my mind street preaching for some reason. I'm not sure why I had that. Is that incorporated into it, or is it just speaking at churches?
There are street preachers. I mean, like my friend Stump, he's a street preacher, but I am not a street preacher. I've never stood on a street corner and preached in that way. I have prayed for people numbers of times in public, but I'm not really a street preacher.
Okay. All right. I've never had somebody come to my home. I've never seen a street preacher. I'd love for the Mormons to come to my home or something. I think they would run out very fast, but I would love to have them come in. I kind of feel a bit excluded that they haven't. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So I guess we've already started kind of thing. I just was curious about that. So what's your views on perfection? Oh, that's okay. Christian's just a bit wrapped up. Yeah, okay, gotcha.
I'm sorry, Mark. Give me 2 seconds. I apologize.
No, perfectly fine. Yeah, I have seen a video, Kata, of somebody on an Australian sort of train preaching, and it's kind of considered rude in Australia to interrupt people's ride. So that
I think
that
the
went
American
down
culture
like a
as it
lead
relates
balloon.
to religion is probably a bit different. I haven't done
Yeah.
all that much international travel in my life, but it seems to be that things like evangelism or public ministry or unsolicited ministry are a little bit more, you could say accepted or you could say expected, but America seems to have a culture that's more welcoming for that because of, I guess, the way the country developed. That has changed in urban areas quite a bit versus what it used to be, but out in the country, it's pretty much like that. If somebody walks up to you as you're leaving a restaurant and hands you a gospel tract, it's never considered impolite. People usually accept it even if they don't want it, just to be polite. So it's probably an American thing.
Yeah. I think most places, most Australians would go, okay, that's perfectly fine. But sort of when you disrupt the ride on the train, people get mad. They get really mad. It's considered very impolite.
Sure.
Even talking in Japan, when I went to Japan, there were certain things that you had to keep in mind, like talking on a train is just, you are absolutely glared down if you even. Yeah, you sort of talk in whispers if you have to talk, and you try to avoid it so you don't disrupt anybody else. I think it comes from living in very close proximity, but there's certain things that you do. You should stand on the left-hand side of the, is it left or right? There's one city, I think it's Tokyo, that you stand on the left, and Osaka you stand on the right of the escalators so other people can go by, and it's considered immensely rude not to. There's a lot of these very small things that if you don't do, you're going to get the evil eye kind of thing. But the Japanese are so polite, so wonderful, so kind, so gracious, absolutely wonderful people. So and tons of people live in very close proximity, so these rules are kind of really important. But I wanted to ask you about perfection. Just we were watching the thing and it was talking about perfection. And I see perfection as something that it's kind of an abstraction. It's kind of an ideal that doesn't actually exist in the real world. I don't know how you'd get to perfection. And even if you somehow did, I don't know how you'd know if it was perfection. It mentioned sort of Jesus as being perfection, but I do notice there was a few things that Jesus did that weren't exactly perfect, like smiting of the fig tree, for instance.
Well, perfection in the sense that I talk about it, of course, is the biblical sense. The translators who translated the King James Version, they used in the New Testament sometimes words like complete and perfect in a sort of synonymous way. And there are there are a few occasions in the epistles, especially, where those two words are virtually interchangeable. And so there's a bit of a sentiment throughout the New Testament that biblical perfection is synonymous with being complete or fulfilled as far as what God wants from a person or wants for a person. So, like,
Right.
if you notice the banner I have behind me, that's the book that I just published, Out of Egypt, and it's actually on this subject.
Okay.
So it's funny you bring it up. But yeah, perfection in the biblical sense is completeness. And so, like,
Hmm.
when you look at passages like "Be ye therefore perfect, even as I am perfect," what it's saying really is to be complete in the will of God, to fulfill everything that He has for you, and to get to the end, to the destination. So, really, that's what perfection means in that sense. It's not so much a status above other people as much as it's a finishing of the race, a finishing of the course.
Well, I think an analog that I might be able to draw to that is self-actualization in psychology, to fulfill your potentiality, to live up to what you desire to be
Sure.
your potential, which I have no problem with whatsoever. So I guess I'm taking sort of a literal view of perfection there. Why that might not be what you mean. I didn't know you'd written a book. Certainly give me a link or something, and I will
Oh,
throw it
I
in the
write
chat. That's the
numbers of
least I
books.
can do.
That's one of the major things that we do is literature.
Okay.
I'll be happy to send you a free copy. You don't have to pay for it. I always tell people that all of our literature is available for free.
No, don't do that. The postage will be outrageous. It's got a long way to travel, Christian. Seriously, mate.
I sent a box of books one time to Kathmandu, and it never even got there. It got lost in the mountains.
Oh no, that's terrible.
A lot of money too.
Man, too, like Tibet kind of thing. Wow. Is
Yep.
that the Tibet or Nepal? I can't remember which. It's
That
Tibet,
was
isn't it?
Nepal. Yes, the capital of Nepal.
Nepal. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Gotcha. So let's go back and sort of, so you mentioned God in this perfection. So what do you see as God? What is God exactly? I realized this morning actually that I never actually discussed with you what your view, because I talk to a lot of people and they do have differences.
Sure.
I mean, I can presume classical theism, I can presume sort of the omni gods, but how would you describe it?
I'm not so into. I think me and you really briefly touched on this last time. I'm not so into the whole omni thing. I think a lot of those terms are ascribed
Right.
by people. They're not really canon to the faith, so to speak. You don't see that in the scriptures, and actually, in a few
Okay.
occasions, you see something contrary to it. But um, when it says classical theism, even at that, God is a spirit. And so if a person doesn't have an understanding of what is meant by a biblical spirit, they're not going to have any understanding of the biblical God, because first and foremost, He's a spirit. And so people envision God as a person, and they sort of try to understand Him as a person. And He tried to make Himself understandable as a person. So I get why they do that, but ultimately He's a spirit. So even when you spoke of like the Lord Jesus smiting the fig tree and it seemed like a human reaction, this was a spirit portraying itself as a person. So there's a bit of I use the phrase lost in translation. It takes on a different meaning there, for a spiritual desire to materialize itself as a person or a will of an individual. But God is a spirit. So a person really has to wrap their mind around what a spirit is in order to understand what a God is. And when you're speaking of perfection, there's a process, Paul the apostle, but agreed upon by all of the brethren in the New Testament. But there's a threefold process that leads to this idea of biblical perfection. The process is first translation of the Spirit. And translation of the Spirit is the moment that an individual makes contact with the Spirit of God, or we say colloquially, we say accepts Christ, then that individual's spirit is immediately translated into the kingdom of God. And that individual, from a spiritual perspective, is eternally secure. The next part of the process, the first part being translation of the Spirit, the second part is transformation of the mind. So after a person has had that initial contact with the Spirit of God, then they go out throughout their life with this process that we call Christianity. And that process gradually transforms their mind from what is referred to by the apostle as one glory to another glory, phase by phase or step by step. Their mind is gradually transformed. So you have translation, then you have transformation. And the finality of this, once the transformation is completed, is transfiguration of the body. So that's when the actual physical body is transfigured into what they saw on the Mount of Transfiguration, which was the perfected body that did not live off of blood like these bodies do. So you have a threefold process: translation of the spirit, transformation of the mind, and a finality of transfiguration of the spirit. And that process is what is meant by biblical perfection.
Right. Okay. So it's biblical perfection, as sort of completeness with this biblical spirit. Now, and I understand what you mean, that sort of people, I presume the word is anthropomorphize things. They
Yes.
put human traits on things that are not human. And you sort of said, well, they have the biblical spirit has spiritual desire, and so I'm wondering, what can a spirit desire? What would that look like? What would that be?
Well,
And
desire,
why?
even desire is an interesting word, because the
Sure.
the word lust, as it was used by the apostolic founders, was a variation of the word desire. And it's my
Mm.
belief that that word was intended by the writers to indicate a natural human desire that had been overcharged or pushed to the point of excess by spiritual influence. So what lust would be a desire that's perfectly natural, having been pushed to a point of excess outside of moderation. So it's natural for a man to eat a meal when he's hungry. It's not natural for a man to eat himself into diabetes or into the grave. It's natural for a man to desire a woman. It's not natural for a man to desire every single woman that walks past him all the time. So lust is where you take these perfectly natural desires and you overcharge them. You push them to the point of excess where they become destructive. That is what is meant by lust. So when you say, what does it desire? Human beings, in my opinion, typically operate with very little exception historically off of lust and not real, true, heartfelt desire. I think that we're motivated by things that lead to our destruction, things that destroy us, things that are so excessive and so outside of the intended use. So you have words like perversion. There are words in the New Testament like perversion, and what perverted means in a New Testament context is it means anything outside of its intended use or its natural use. So the perversion of something is using something apart from what it was intended for. So lust takes the natural things and it overcharges them, and it causes you to use them in a perverse way, or a way that is outside of their intended use, which makes a natural thing become destructive. And so that's why the writer said, when lust conceives, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it's finished, it brings forth death. It's a process, these overcharged natural desires pushed to the point of lust, that pervert the natural things and corrupt the human being from the inside out. So what a spirit would desire, it depends on if that spirit is a Holy Spirit, or if that spirit is, like we would say, a fallen angel, for instance. So this goes into some pretty deep theological stuff. So if I talk too much, then just stop me. But
No, that's okay.
God is
I
a
just,
spirit.
I just, for a start, I feel like the naturalistic fallacy is being made there. That if something is natural, then it is good, and we know that that's not necessarily the case. That there are natural things in the world that are very, very bad for us, poisons and venoms and all this kind of stuff. But secondarily to that, I don't think I would sort of define lust as being an overcharged desire kind of thing. I don't think I would sort of say that. I think I would say that lust is simply a sexual attraction to something, or some kind of attraction to
New
something.
Testament authors meant when they used the word, not what like you and I would mean today.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I'm not sure I would sort of say, yeah, the natural desires, when we overcharge them, I'm not sure I would understand what that means. Who decides what's overcharged and how much is overcharged? Who makes that designation, and why?
Well, I guess that would boil down to like apostolic doctrine to indicate when something was going above and beyond what was intended. So like there's like one small example would be when Paul's writing to Timothy, and he says, Timothy, a bishop really ought to be the husband of one wife. And so that developed in church culture to mean, first and foremost, that a bishop should not be promiscuous, but secondly, that he should not be committed to more than one woman at a time. And so Paul would have considered it, allegedly, to have been an overcharged natural use of the wife or of the marriage covenant, to be promiscuous or to have more than one wife. So he would have identified that as going from a natural God-given desire to a lust. And that lust is coming from an inspiration that's not, which means it's a demonic inspiration.
A demonic inspiration.
Well, the word demonic meaning influenced by evil spirits, fallen angels, other kinds of spirits that don't have your best intentions at heart.
Okay, well, I mean, I think that sort of living by desires is bad, but it's mostly due to the consequences. I think that there's that some churches, and I'm not sure where yours stand, but they will condemn a lot of behavior that really hurts nobody and is actually good for the well-being of the individual. I do note that a lot of Catholics sort of are very, very guilty people. They're guilty about everything they do, and it's sort of hard to see them beat themselves up for natural attractions to like people that are attractive, essentially. Just sort of trivial human behavior, and it really worries me that I think that some of the churches are using sort of the trivial nature of our behavior to sort of say, hey, you're broken or damaged in some way, when I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Well, I think the difference with me and you there is that you're going on your discretion, whereas ministers are instructed to try to be faithful to the scriptures, whether they fully understand it or not. You're saying that in accordance with what you feel is appropriate, you're going on your discretion. I'm sort of instructed not to do that. I have discretion like anybody does. I mean, obviously I have opinions. I don't vote even. I don't get involved in politics. It's not that I don't have opinions or preferences, but I just feel that as a minister, I'm instructed not to use my own discretion. So I try not to. I try to use the scriptures and judge by those.
Why wouldn't you use your own discretion for your own life? Like, who else could be in a better perspective for your own life than you?
Well, I mean, a simple kind of a cheap answer to that would be me 10 years down the road. But I don't know if that's a specific fallacy, but I think it's a fallacious way of thinking.
Do you have access to that?
Well, no, the point is, the idea is that there is a mind that does. There's a mind that gave had access to that.
Well, I don't know if well, for a start, like so we have a problem with interpretation. So even if the scriptures are coming from a mind that knows what's 10 years down the road, it has to relay that to humans who write it down, and then it has to be reinterpreted by humans. Well, aside from all of the copying and translating and stuff, that aside, it has to be read by a human to translate it, and those translations always vary wildly. It seems to me that a lot of the things in the Bible, they don't get to sort of they don't help me at all. In fact, they sort of, I think that if I did listen to that and some of what some people say their interpretation is, I would certainly be harmed by it. Are you aware of the sort of people that sort of say, hey, we're fallen, we're damaged, and we're sort of not worthy kind of thing?
Yeah, I think me and you touched on this before. I don't remember. It seems like we did. And that's one thing that a lot of times I have to clear up with conversations like this, is that I always ask people not to make a lot of those assumptions about me, because I do hold some outlying positions on some things.
Oh.
The idea that something is broken or damaged, you know, I'm a strong believer in pre-ordination and you know, determinism. And
Yes,
so
yeah.
I think of that as just being a part of a necessary process and a means to an end. Whereas one person might read and it says, well, Adam and Eve goofed up, and so this is this. I would say, well, that was very obviously part of God's plan, because the scripture says that he had prepared the sacrifice of Calvary before the foundation of the world. It means he knew that they'd fall before they were ever given the opportunity. So it was necessary that they fall to get to Calvary, and it was necessary to get to Calvary to get to perfection. So God intended for them to fall, obviously, to me.
But that also means that God intends some people never to be perfect, and I think we've touched on this and sort of discussed it, and you've sort of said, yeah, then some people are sort of, you know, intended never to get to that sort of situation kind of thing. So that does kind of I mean, I don't think like that. I think that if I did, it would make me very sad. So I can empathize with maybe why you put so much time and energy trying to sort of change people. But on the other hand, I think, well, why put sort of time and energy trying to preach to people if that's already decided?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've had that question numbers of times, and the other day I had a debate with a guy about. I say it was just sort of a public discussion, but he's not a believer. Sure. He's not a believer in things like preordained will and things like that, and I am. And so his approach to it was, in my manner of speaking, blah blah blah, God's not fair. And that's pretty much been the typical Armenian position, is that if these scriptures are being understood for what they say, then God's the bad guy somehow. And so this sort of goes back first and foremost to the idea that we don't use our discretion, but we trust the scriptures because we expect that our understanding will evolve, which necessitates that we are currently in a premature version of our own understanding. So that being said, when Paul wrote about this, because he was actually faced with this question back in his day in Romans chapter 9, when he wrote about this, his reaction to it was, who do you think you are to question whether or not God is just? What position are you in to make that judgment call? So he was very quick to dismiss that attitude altogether and just say that individual is very arrogant for even thinking they're going to question the will of God. That's one of the fundamental differences with me and you, is that I have had an experience with God that I don't think that you have. And that really does make all the difference.
Well, I don't question the will of God. I question whether God exists at all. Right. And whether you do have a reliable methodology, sort of an epistemology, to sort of say, hey, I don't know if you'd say no, God exists, whether you'd claim that as a knowledge claim, or whether you'd say you believe that God exists. I think that I haven't heard a reliable way of telling that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not dismissing your personal experience. I of course I can't dismiss your personal experience. I haven't experienced it, but at the same time, I think that that's impossible to relay to me. So I can't take it as a some sort of evidence for that God.
The other night, you're breaking up a little bit, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it might be your end. I'm fine. I think you're sort of. That's okay. That's all right.
A little bit. I was talking to.
Well, if it gets any worse, maybe just turn the camera off. I know that takes a lot more bandwidth than just audio, but that's okay. You're okay. It's just lagged a tiny bit. That's all.
Okay, so I was speaking with a fellow the other day about this, and I got distracted by that and I lost my train of thought. But what I was trying to say was, God is not a knowledge. I have no interest in converting you with words or persuading you with an argument. I'm fairly gifted as far as being intellectual. I've always been interested in the sciences, and I'm certainly not the smartest person in the world, but I think God has gifted me in the sense that I'm able to understand things pretty quickly. And for whatever reason, I seem to excel in that field. That being said, that's not the way people are converted. That's not what conversion is. Conversion is not a knowledge. There's never been anybody in the world, in my opinion, that was ever converted by a good argument. Conversion is an experience. So I'm not attempting to say something to tie you up in a knot, to make you question what you know, to make you see it from a different direction. It's not really that. Christianity is an experience. God is an experience. When you say, does he exist? The way that most physicists consider things to exist is, are they made up of atomic particles? God is a spirit. So in that sense, he does not exist, if that's what we mean by existence. But there was a materialized body, Jesus Christ, that was made up of atomic particles, and that exists. And so I guess you could say that God exists in the sense that he expressed himself through the flesh and body of his son, Jesus. But if we're saying, does he exist? Your spirit does not exist in Christian theology because it's not made of atomic matter. So it wouldn't exist to Neil deGrasse Tyson's satisfaction, but yet it does have an influence on the world, and it does have an impact from the Christian point of view. So it just all depends on what you mean by existence. If we're saying, can you get it in a laboratory beaker, then the answer is no, it does not exist in that sense.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of things you can't put in a beaker that exist. I think that's a really, really bad analogy. I get sort of the metaphor that you're trying to use.
Gravity is obviously noticing a force, and we assume gravitons. But what I mean is that there's not going to be any measurement with sufficiently advanced technology to detect him in that way.
Okay, no, I get what you're saying. I get the metaphor that you're saying, but also when you sort of say, hey, it doesn't exist. So I think you mean materially, because there's a million things that don't exist that I can come up with. And I was talking earlier to the chat, numbers are something that don't exist, right? They're not things that actually exist in the world. So I can show you one ball, but I can't show you the one. Like, there is no way you can access that one. It is simply abstracter. It is simply an abstract concept that we use through maths, which is also an abstraction. But these things, they don't exist in the real world. So you can't have a one take any action in the real world. The problem is that you're describing a spirit that has some kind of action on somebody that if it does have any influence on the world, we should be able to detect that in some way. In some way, it's going to be possible, because the physical world simply is made up of sort of these things. Any action that occurs is going to affect the real world, and hence change the properties of that physical, which we should be able to detect. Now, whether or not we've detected excuse me, whether or not we've detected it is another story entirely. Like, don't get me wrong, it could be that it's doing it, that the spirit is doing it all the time, changing what the world's physical makeup is like, and we can't detect it. But if the world is changed, we should be able to detect it in some way at some point.
Sure.
So the only way I could see that we would be unable to detect anything changing the physical world is if it doesn't actually have an influence on the physical world.
Well, that actually, I think gravity is a good analogy there, to be honest with you, because I understand what you're saying. Well, gravity, the word graviton is just a placeholder for whatever the heck that is. They don't really know what a graviton is. It's a theoretical particle.
Yeah.
But gravity is a force that we experience that's a consequence of something else. So gravity is not a thing, but it's a consequence of things. So we can look and we can see gravitational impacts in physics. We can see that matter attracts things and all this kind of stuff. But gravity is not something you could put in a jar. So I guess that'd be a decent analogy to say that ultimately there is a material that makes up God, but we haven't been able to know how to look at it. Because I think that a lot of I'm not a physicist, obviously, so take this with a grain of salt. Yeah. But I think a lot of the people who assume that there's a such thing as a graviton are doing just that and assuming. I don't think the data backs that up. I think that's just a bit of a placeholder.
Well, yeah, and sort of so I'm not sure. Yeah, I understand what you mean about graviton, but that would be an abstract, like graviton.
No, okay, so I was getting around to something else. I'm sorry. My comparison was something like divine healing. If you take somebody's eyes who aren't working and then the next day they're working, you see an effect. You see that there's a material change in the ability for that individual to see, which can obviously be noticed at the molecular level. That doesn't mean that you're able to observe the force that caused the change, but you can observe that a change has occurred. And so I think in a similar way as gravity, we're assuming a graviton or we're assuming a God, but we're observing whatever the assumed thing is causing in the real world, such as the eye.
So how do you know that it's a spirit then, if you can't observe this thing? What's the rationale for if you can say, hey, we can observe the effect, but we can't observe the cause, and we don't know what the cause is?
Well, when you say you don't know what the cause is,
well, let me finish. Okay. I would be okay in saying, hey, well, God's a placeholder for some unknown effect. But if we can't know what caused that effect, then how do you justify putting spirit into these and giving it all of these characteristics?
Because of the situation. So, like, for instance, with divine healing, there's a gentleman that I know who was healed of lung cancer. He had really bad lung cancer when he was in his 30s, and he petitioned God and he said his faith, and his lung cancer went away. There's a million examples of that, obviously, but the individual petitioned a spirit. He petitioned it based on what the scriptures about the Spirit, and he reaped the benefit of doing that. And so he says, well, I set out with this in mind. This is the thing that told me to set out. This is the result that it told me I would get, and I got that result.
Okay, well, let's look at that example then. So has there been people whose cancer has gone into remission without petitioning a spirit?
Sure, yeah.
And has there been people who petitioned a spirit and their cancer has, just been as bad as before or even accelerated?
Sure.
So how do we know that it is the petitioning of the spirit that is causing the cancer to go into remission?
Well, you don't know it. You're basically taking Occam's razor in that situation from a spiritual point of view. You're saying this seems to be what the cause of this was, and until further data comes in, this is what we're going to lean into as an answer.
Well, Occam's razor would say that it's a natural process, and I'll explain why. So Occam's razor says that for the most likely explanation, or with all things being equal across the board, don't multiply entities. So search for the simplest explanation rather than the more complicated one.
Sure.
So you have one that is, as part of natural process, the cancer naturally went into remission because that's part of the natural process kind
Stage
of thing.
4
right?
lung cancer, Mark?
Sure, yeah. All kinds of...
Sure.
Yeah,
No,
cancer does go into remission.
Okay. For stage 4 lung cancer to go into remission without treatment.
Okay, well, that aside, it's natural as opposed to a God interfered in the natural process.
No,
right?
I understand.
One is a lot more.
No, that's a reasonable point. That's a reasonable point.
Right.
It is not
So
reasonable
just
to say that stage 4 cancer goes into remission on its own. That doesn't happen.
Well, and they weren't receiving treatment at all.
No treatment at all. And he still has the X-rays to this day.
Yeah, just a quick search says that can stage 4 cancer go into remission? It depends on the type of cancer. Stage 4 cancer may go into partial or complete remission. So yeah, it can happen. It's so unlikely.
It does not go into remission without treatment.
Well, I mean, I don't know I'll be honest, I don't know the medical situation here. I wouldn't comment on whether it's possible or not. But I think that's something you would have to say, hey, I'm going to present the medical documents and facts that shows this happened and it couldn't have happened any other way.
If you were trying to persuade somebody to agree with you, that's what you would do, yes.
If you were trying to persuade somebody. Okay. So I'm not sure, why would you not want to persuade people that praying to a God can send their cancer into remission, if that is in fact true?
No, that's not exactly what I meant. What I was saying was, if you were trying, like you and I are having a discussion, let's say for the sake of argument that we're having an argument. If you and I were having an argument and I was trying to say, well, my position is more reliable than your position, then I would bring you testimonials. I would bring you the X-rays. I would bring you medical records that no advanced treatment was given. And I would try to make the case that what I'm telling you is the truth. I don't really do that, to be honest, because like what I said earlier, my experience has been, as well as my understanding of what the scriptures told me to expect that I didn't listen to, so I had to go out and experience it for myself. That's not the kind of thing that converts people. All the knowledge in the world is not what converts people. So I just think it would be a waste of my time.
Okay, so I just looked up stage 4 lung cancer and it can go into remission. In fact, if it's only spread locally, like regionally, the survival rate's like 37%.
Mark,
so it's very
3 months to live, Mark. You're really...
Yes, no, I understand that. No, it's because when they say how long you've got to live, they're taking the very worst case scenario.
You're taking
the
it
very worst case scenario.
Based on X-rays of how much it's spread.
Yeah. And there's still an 8% to live if it's spread all throughout the body, including lymph nodes and things like that. So what I'm saying is that
Occam's razor is the 8%, Mark?
What do you mean?
You're using Occam's razor to explain this, but your explanation is depending upon an 8% at best?
Yeah, so the whole point is that these unlikely things do happen, right? A coincidence and unlikely things do happen.
No, coincidence happens. But
Well,
to
to
say
point
that
to
everything
something,
that happens is coincidence, that's a bit of a stretch.
well, to point to something improbable and saying, hey, that couldn't have happened naturally, or it has to have had some intervention by a god. We're
But it's
looking
because
at,
of circumstances, Mark. It's because this individual took the faith position and did not take sufficient treatment. This anecdotal example was of an individual that was petitioning a god for this result. So your 8% just
yes,
went way out the window because it got a lot more specific.
but this has happened to people that didn't petition a god,
No, I'm not
right?
saying there aren't freak situations where it happens, but when you have a
Yes.
success rate that's so low, and this individual took this approach,
Mhm.
refused other approaches and took this approach, you're saying, well, this is just, it's 1 in a million, but it happened. But there's a lot of these 1 in a million out there. There's a lot of
8%.
testimonials like this out there.
8% is not 1 in a million.
It's not 8%, Mark. You don't know anybody who has stage 4 fully spread lung cancer that went into remission.
No, I don't know them, but I'm looking at sort of medical sites. Remission is possible for stage 4 lung cancer.
With no
Reduction in
chemotherapy, with no treatments.
reduction in tumor growth. Yes, the body can do some incredible things. It can, and this has been known to happen. That people have said, "Hey, you are going to die of cancer," and it's gone into remission, and they haven't prayed to a spirit. It's just our understanding of medical science is, hey, under these usual conditions, this is the prognosis they have, and it will usually be very worst case scenario. The reason why we do that for patients is because if they get told, hey, you may survive, and the prognosis is, well, you've only got, under 10% chance of surviving, it is better to tell them, hey, your chances are very low, and then they don't get their hopes up and then are viciously crushed. It's a lot better for the patient. So that's why we do that. And the doctor will be very clear with their prognosis, like overwhelmingly the people with this die. But the whole point is, it's incredibly unlikely that somebody gets that and survives without treatment. But it does happen, and not all of them petition a god.
Somebody
So
who
you're trying to, Christian,
petitioning
please,
God.
Christian, come on now, mate. Come on, let me
Mark,
speak.
you are reaching. This
I don't think so.
individual who started out with, I'll grant you the 8%, though I think we
Mhm.
both know it's exaggerated, but I'll grant you the 8%. This individual happens to be one of the individuals who did not go the route of treatment and specifically petitioned the situation spiritually, and then got this extremely unlikely result, not taking the treatment with this thing in mind. There's no way that you're going to stick by a number of 8% on that, I hope.
Yeah, so I'll just grab the cancer center thing and pop it in private chat. Just one sec. But
Seems
sort of
so strange to dispel that so easily, not have any sort of desire to explore that further. It's almost like you're just waiting to dispel it as an example.
Well, it's just that I know that all kinds of things happen with people's illnesses, that things that people have said are a death sentence to people, that they overcome it. The body overcomes it.
Sure.
That we don't necessarily can do accurate prognosis as far as sort of fatal illness is concerned and things. People with brain tumors. Hang on, well, let me finish. Christian, let me finish. People with brain tumors that are instance that are inoperable, and they say, hey, you are going to be dead within a certain amount of time, and they have basically gone into remission, and usually it's sort of athletes and things that have healthy lifestyles and have geared into, hey, I'm going to survive this, rather than praying to a spirit. So you are making the claim it is the prayer to the spirit that is what caused this, right? You're making that knowledge claim that it was
not necessarily. What I'm saying is that I don't think it's fair for you to be so quick to dispel that possibility because of the circumstances.
Well, I'm not quick to dispel the possibility. What I want to know is how you know it, how you justify claiming that you know that it's the case that this is what caused it.
Well, I didn't claim that I knew that. Now, justify is a different word. How do I justify taking that position is different. I haven't claimed that I've known that that's the thing that happened. To me, it seems rather obvious, but again, I'm a person of faith. As far as justifying it, That's one
Yeah.
of very, very many examples that I've personally been privy to and or involved in personally, to where things like that have happened. And so when you have it time after time after time, you begin to build up a confidence in it.
Right, but you've also said that people pray and it doesn't happen.
Sure.
So are you taking those into account? Why aren't they taken into account?
Well, I don't think that it's always the will of God for things to be resolved that way. There was one instance in the scriptures, for instance, where the people had asked Jesus, they said, "Why is this boy sick? Is he sick because of his sins or his parents' sins?" And he said, "It's not like that at all." And he said in so many words, "He's sick because one day I'm going to walk by and heal him. And that's going to cause you guys to believe in me." So there's many reasons that people get sick, and there's many reasons that people are or are not healed of a sickness. So the idea of saying, well, we're going to base our confidence in this based on the success rate is a fallacy to begin with, because the Bible never says that every single person is going to recover in a certain way or at a certain time or get sick for a certain reason. Every circumstance is different. In some of these circumstances, the individual feels that spiritual pull to petition their faith for healing, and in circumstances they're healed. Now, you would argue that every one of those were coincidence, and I would argue that that's ridiculous.
No. What I'm saying is that you're employing something called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. You're counting all the hits and you're dismissing all of the misses. So
I'm not even counting all the hits.
Well, just let me finish. When you look at a population of people, right, and they're all doing the same thing, I could say, okay, they're all locking their door before they go to bed. That's a correlation, right? That they're all doing that. And some people die of illnesses and some people survive. And I could say, hey, look, everybody that survived locked their door before they went to bed. So that's the cause of it. It is not enough to sort of say that, because you've got to take the weight of the people that locked their door and still died of the illness, right? So this is the thing. When we look at a population, we could find any of their behaviors across the swath of that population, as long as they're all doing the behavior. What we want to know and what is important is whether that behavior, find people that don't lock their doors. And if there is a better survival rate for people that lock their doors as opposed to not, right, a control group, then we can say, hey, that has an impact in some way on it. That contributes to them surviving, right? It's not enough to look at a population and go, the people are all praying, and go, well, look, these people survived. Because if the rate of survival is the same among people not praying, then the prayer and the intercessory of a God has nothing to do with their survival.
Well, you and I are approaching this from two very different perspectives. This is kind of why I said earlier that I don't argue these things with people for the sense of trying to convert them, because first off, God's children are a great minority in the population anyways. He's not so interested in the majority of people in the world. So probably the healing rate of people who really are Christians would be so negligible in the greater statistics that it would get lost in translation. So I wouldn't look for it that way anyways.
Well, we should be able to find that statistically over a broad enough sample size. The law of statistics says the larger the sample, the more close to the accurate p-value probability we will actually have. So I like to point out that the Templeton Foundation, which was a Christian foundation, did a research on intercessory prayer, where they had a large amount of people pray for sick people to see if they could intercede on their behalf. The problem comes that the people that got prayed for did no better. And in fact, they had a number of groups. They had people that weren't prayed for, people that were, and out of the people that were prayed for, they separated into people that knew they were being prayed for and people that didn't know they were being prayed for, right?
No,
so this is how they split it up. Yeah. So the people that knew they were being prayed for actually did worse, because they added that perhaps they felt like there was some sort of impetus, some sort of compulsion, some sort of expectation to get well, to live up to that prayer, and that might have caused stress, which sort of made them do worse. So it's notable that all of these studies that we've had on prayer and its actual physical effects You know, and this is the beauty of statistics, is it cuts through the bias, it cuts through any of our biases and leaves sort of pure math to say, hey, does this have an effect? And it doesn't.
I think we're honestly, Mark, I think we're sort of speaking two different languages. That's just completely
Okay,
me.
and I'm sorry, I know.
I mean, that's
But
not even approaching the way that I look at the subject at all. I mean, I would think of a study like that as being so foolish and unproductive. That's just meaningless to me. That's the kind of thing that doesn't even enter my mind when I think about this.
I'm sorry, a small is unproductive. No, I didn't say it's unproductive. I'm just saying that sort of if you, so when you study statistics, I did some units on statistical data analysis in university, that if you have a small sample size, it's not unproductive, it's just not reliable. Like if you have a group of 4 people and 3 of them have blonde hair, right? You can sort of say, hey, well, 3/4 of people have blonde hair. It's not accurate. It's
No,
accurate.
I understand that. What I'm
Okay.
saying to you is I'm not looking at it in the sense of trying to determine a success rate. That's not at all the way I'm approaching it. You asked me a question earlier that we never got around to, which is, if things are
Okay.
determined, then why would you go out and preach?
Yeah.
Right. So if God has already predetermined who's going to make it and who's not going to make it, then preaching seems like a bit of a foolish thing to do. And that's one of the things that Armenian-minded people often bring up. Well, the problem with that is the scriptures say to go out and preach. And the scriptures also say that things are predetermined. And so in the human mind, you have this inherent contradiction. But yet, what we're told to do, or what we're instructed to do throughout the volume of the book, and especially in the book of Psalms, is to cast out our human reasoning and just do what the scriptures say regardless. And so they say things are predetermined, but they also say go out and preach to the people. So we do it because that's what it says to do. We pray for the sick and we expect in healing because that's what it says to do. It's a faith position.
Right. But so here's my problem. Why would we cast out reasoning? Don't you think reasoning is
Because
the
it
best
says
way
to.
to get to the truth?
But it says to.
No, I get that. I get that. But if we cast out our reasoning and just follow a book without questioning it or thinking about it, isn't that going to lead to just sort of following whatever the book says, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, when you say without thinking about it, I think that's maybe when I'm saying the word reasoning, I think we're using it differently. And that's going to happen numbers of times because I'm speaking directly to what the New Testament authors meant by these terms, right? Not so much what we mean by them today. When they use terms like that and instructed against it, what they were saying is anytime that your human intuition directly deviates from the scriptures or is contrary to the clearness of the scriptures, don't trust that human intuition. It's not saying not to reasonably consider the scriptures and try to make the most sense of them as you can, but it's saying that anytime that your human intuition is directly opposed to them, cast off that human intuition and don't trust it. So that's what I mean when I say reasoning.
Okay. Because I see reasoning as sort of a rationality based upon logic, based upon sort of Aristotelian logical values, right? So we're talking about the law of identity, law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle. That makes some logical statements that we know is true. That lends to an evaluation of truth statements in the world, and then we can sort of implement a reliable way to say whether something is true. And I think we had a conversation about truth before, that you were using it differently than I was as well.
Yes.
So when I say truth in this way, I'm sort of talking about what exists in reality, the state of reality. So if I say it is true that I am sitting down and talking to you, that's not a metaphor for anything spiritual or anything. What I'm talking about is that is actually in reality kind of thing.
No. Yeah, we had this discussion before. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's important because a lot of people believe things that are not in reality evidently true, that they have in their heads an idea of something. We see these people all the time, and even though I wouldn't sort of judge their mental health or anything, they believe things that are not in fact true. Like, flat earthers are one, and sort of, other people like that. So what I want to do is take what I believe to be true and examine it to say what reliable way can I use to see whether this belief is in fact true or not true. Is there, and so the fallacies that I brought up, I'm not bringing them up to be mean or anything. It's just these are ways that our bias can get in the way, kind of thing.
Maybe where me and you are getting off in a different direction is, I think when you say fallacy, you think it's like an honest fallacy, like that I'm just unaware of it. It's not that. I'm very self-aware of it. I'm very self-aware that some of the positions that I take are very contrary to sound human reasoning, as far as what you mean when you say true or logical. I'm accepting that. I'm taking the conscientious position that I am abandoning my discretion of truth because of this other resource. And so it's not that it's a fallacy in the traditional sense that I'm being deceived by my own way of thinking. I'm very self-aware of it. I'm a very rational thinker. I'm just abandoning a percentage of that rationality for this faith-based position, and I'm doing it conscientiously. I'm aware of how it sounds.
But why would you use, so that would lean on faith so heavily? And to me, I don't know of any position that you couldn't do that for, like just take on faith. If there seems to be any position at all, I could use faith to justify. The justification of faith doesn't appear to get you to what aligns with reality.
Do you have an example of that?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, I could take it on faith that astrology is true. I could take it on faith that the paper will tell me in my astrological column that sort of, what it says will happen to me, definitely, if not tomorrow, then the next day or next day or next day, kind of thing. And I could use faith to justify that, regardless of the actual physical circumstances lined up with the sort of interpretation of the article itself. I could still overcome that with a faith-based position. And at one point, I did have that faith. I think I did take faith that astrology sort of, where the stars were and where the sun was and where the moon was changed how we're born, like our personalities and things. That is patently not true.
No, that's what I was going to say, is your experience did not bear that out as being accurate, and so you abandoned it.
Well, yeah, but if I was to say, hey, all I need for justification is faith, I would still be believing that today.
Well, no, I think that's another place where we didn't just cover all the bases. Is
okay.
It's a general, it's the initial step is a step of blind faith. That's true. But there's a sort of a general confidence that's built in it through a series of experiences. And so it is true that the initial step is blind faith, but every step after that is a little bit less blind because of experience. That's why I was saying Christianity is an experience. You and I are at a stark disagreement for one reason, because I had a certain experience that you did not have. It's not because you understood something I didn't understand, because I understand many things. It's just because you and I had two different experiences.
And that sort of initial step, or the blind faith, to me, when you describe that, it sounds like confirmation bias. It sounds like I put faith in this thing, and the more I looked for confirmation, the more that confirmation was given to me.
Well, it's certainly possible there's confirmation bias. It's also possible that it was confirmed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess, sure. But what I'm trying to get across is,
you make it, guys. I've been reading the comments. Sorry.
Oh, okay, but probably not a good idea. I do. Yeah, I don't think they're going to like your sort of irrational thing.
Look, these are my friends. James, Aiden, those are my buddies.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to give you a hard time. So I guess what I would say is that one of these ways, sort of saying, okay, I'm going to be irrational and try and eliminate any confirmation bias that could possibly exist or not exist, and take it as a systematic way to justify what I believe to be true based upon reliable methodology, I think you've got a much better chance of getting to the truth than just sort of say, well, I'm going to believe this first and take that faith leap, and then like look for the signs, it'll be confirmed to me. The reason why is because we know that bias exists. We've seen it in action before. When somebody writes a scientific paper and they want a result to be true, they will find the results to get them to that truth. That's why peer review exists. It's so somebody who doesn't want it to be true. So a competitor can look at it and go, you know, is he actually just finding the results that he wants?
No, that's for sure. I mean, that's absolutely correct. It really does go back to the experience, Mark. The scriptures teach, for instance, that when a person receives the Spirit of God, they receive love, just a general charity and compassion for perfect strangers, and that they become the kind of person that doesn't own anything. They take a vow of poverty and will do anything to help others and to be a light to others in a spiritual way and a natural way. Well, I certainly wasn't like that. And so I took the faith-based position that was true, and it is true. Like you, I love you. I know you may not understand that, but I would give you everything if you needed it. Like there's nothing I would withhold from you if I felt as though you needed it. There's something that entered into me that confirmed that scripture, and it's real. I really do experience it.
Well, I guess I would sort of say, well, that there's certainly people that need things. I don't think you should. I think that's wrong advice to give at the detriment of yourself. The problem with that is that when you assist and rescue people, as it's called in sort of psychological terms, to the detriment of yourself, you're no longer able to help anybody else.
If
and that's
you're not
where
living by faith, that's true. I agree. But when you are
if
living
you're
by
not
faith, God
living
makes
by
it alive, and so
faith.
you don't run out. I've given myself dry many, many, many times. And when I did it by faith, sincerely, those resources returned to me speedily. So when you're living by faith, you don't run out of resources.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, I mean, it may not have happened to you, but I think there are people that sort of gave to churches and gave to the poor to the point of destroying their own lives. That has happened in the past. And, you know, and maybe they weren't giving to the right churches. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they weren't, you know, but that has happened in the past.
You're saying maybe some people somewhere, maybe, and I'm saying me and people I know personally.
Okay. Yeah, so that sort of anecdotal evidence, it doesn't carry a lot of
It's a little
weight.
bit more than
I
what you
get
said,
that.
though, right?
Well, yeah, sure. So I think that when I say that sort of rescue behavior is sort of considered by psychology to be dangerous, that's what I'm talking about. It's sort of that mentality to save people at any cost can get you into trouble. Let me see if I can get an analogy. I'll go to, I'm not sure if I'd mentioned I was a surf lifesaver when I was younger.
I think you mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah. So the way that you save somebody is sometimes you've just got to put a foot in their chest and push, kind of thing, get them away from you. That's the best thing you can do for them, because if they grab you,
I had to take that approach, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that whole thing about giving everything is you know, it's a nice sentiment. I think that giving what you can is fantastic. I think giving everything can be very dangerous to people. I've forgotten what the line was. Oh yeah, that you sort of feel very generous and that you love people and you want to help them. But I don't see that as a particularly unique Christian value. I see that as
me. I didn't have that before.
it's
It was a
unique.
position that the scriptures told me that I would take, and when I took by faith, I did in fact take it. So it was unique to me.
No, I get that, but there's other people that have converted to other religions and it's been unique to them, like people that have joined Islam and become very humble and very sort of, you know, giving away their possessions and things like that. Very communal afterwards. Sure. But there's also been people who have just had a change of heart and started to give away vast sums of money, kind of thing, and they haven't had religion. There's people, all kinds of people that have done that. I don't see that as necessarily a Christian thing. I mean, even the
point I'm making, though, Mark. The point is that that is the thing that I was seeking. It's not so much the thing itself, but it's that I, a person that did not have that, read in the scriptures that you can have that, took it by faith, and then received that. So it was the experience I'm referring to.
So we're sort of talking past one another, because I'm not like, I love that you have found fulfillment in this belief kind of thing. It you know, that's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to detract from that. What I am looking at is whether this fulfillment that you have found, what in fact, in reality, in my version of reality, what was it caused by, and whether it was caused by a spirit that cannot be seen acting upon you. And so when you talk to me and you sort of say, hey, I found fulfillment and other people have found fulfillment in other ways, it doesn't tell me, it's not good evidence that there is a spirit that is actually causing this to happen. What it says is that an event happened in your life and you felt fulfilled, right? But the question is,
it's the fact that that's the thing I was seeking. It's the experience of getting what you were seeking. I think that you're putting all the emphasis on the charity itself. It's true that a lot of people are just more charitable than others, and a lot of people find fulfillment in charity. That's not so much what I'm highlighting. I'm highlighting the fact that I took the position by faith that I would receive a heart of charity because the scriptures said I would. And I stepped out that first step by faith, and then that was confirmed. It's the experience that I'm highlighting of that being confirmed.
Yeah. And I don't think it's surprising that if you use sort of affirmations to say, hey, if I have faith, I will receive a heart of charity, that you become charitable. That's sort of very trivial. It's sort of saying, hey, if I work out, I'm going to get bigger. It's not, you know, the fact that religions, well, maybe, but it's sort of what I'm trying to get at is if you go out and actively try to change yourself to something else and take a faith that it will happen and affirm, and this is why we use affirmations in the mirror, like, you know, I am charismatic, you are, you know, powerful, and you are this, and you are confident, kind of thing. You will tell yourself that in a mirror. That's affirmations.
I've heard of people doing
yeah, I've never done them, but you know, people do them, and they do kind of work. It's that tell yourself what you want to be, and you'll trick yourself into being that thing. And I'm not saying you tricked yourself. It's just, it's not really a exceptional event that somebody that wanted to become a better person, chose a religion focused on self-improvement, said, hey, if you follow this and have faith, you'll be improved, and then you experience self-improvement. I get what you're saying, that's meaningful to you, and I'm not trying to detract from that. But no, what I'm saying is, from the outside, that's kind of trivial.
But that's what I meant when I say I'm not trying to convert you. I don't think.
No, I get you.
I could go on and on for the next 10 hours and go on with anecdotal things that are fairly persuasive, but that's not the way that people are converted. It is an experience. A person is converted by experience. Jesus, when he spoke to the disciples on Mount Olivet before his ascension, he said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He referred to them as creatures. He didn't even call them people. He called them creatures. And so by foreknowledge, he understood that some of those creatures were to be developed into the image of God and would not be creatures anymore. So the disciples didn't know who. They knew their job was to go preach to everybody. And then through that preaching, God would reach the ones that were to become his children. But those disciples were not privy to who they were. And so they were instructed to preach to all the world. So it's not that it was a waste of time. It's that they didn't have the information to know who to go to. So they went to everybody and threw seeds across the whole field to see what would take.
Seems kind of needlessly convoluted, but that aside, I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to appeal to sort of your obligation under 1 Peter 3:15, which sort of says, give the reasons for the hope in your heart. And I suppose I'm criticizing these reasons as being, to me, it seems like they are, as you said, irrational. And when people are being irrational, you have to conclude that they don't have good reasons to believe what they believe. So that's where I'm coming from. That I'm sort of criticizing your rational
It's irrational to
justification.
set out for something and then get the something that you set out for and then say, well, yeah, it worked. You think that
No,
is rational? Because
no, but I think
you're appealing to First Peter, but it's interesting to appeal to Scripture because the same Scripture says that if you don't believe in God, you're a fool.
sure.
So
I mean,
it's
you can
just
call me a
weird
fool.
to
That's
appeal to
fine.
Scripture in that way.
Well, it's because that particular passage says that you should provide the justification for the hope in your heart.
Well,
I mean,
but Mark,
correct me
I
if I'm
did.
wrong.
Well, no, I did though. I said, hey, the
Yeah,
Bible
yeah.
says do this and you'll get this result. I did it, and then I got the result. So I'm a living testimony that it worked, and I'm one of many.
Well, yes, but I'm not saying it's irrational to do that, right? There's nothing
That's
irrational
what I was trying
about
to figure
that.
out is what you meant by irrational.
No, but what is irrational to me is to ascribe it to something that you can't justify that something, right? So you if it was just, does the religion exist? Yeah, of course it exists. Does the religion has it done well for you? Sure, it's done well for you, and it may have benefited you immensely. I'm not questioning that at all. But the claim on the table here is that a spirit outside of our physical world that exists in reality has caused this change this change to happen, and I'm not getting to the justification of that.
Well, it is a bit of a personified karma, I guess. People, they sort of have this innate belief that you do right by folks because if you don't, it's going to come back to get you. There's really not anything rational about that unless you want to appeal to societal evolution and say that we treat people the way that they treated us. If you step away from that, then really the whole idea of karma is a bit of a silly thing to say. You could take advantage of a certain situation, escape that situation, and reap the advantage with no consequences, besides the fact that you can't go back to that one group again. So I do think that our innate desire to see justice in the world and to see consequence appropriately is a little bit at odds with what we observe in nature. So when you're saying always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you, because Peter, like I said, he's writing to the church and he's saying to the people, you took a faith-based position and the scripture said do thus, and then you did it, and then you got the results. So you're a living testimony that others can have confidence in giving the scriptures a try. So I don't know if your example is really having the effect you intended here, because really I'm doing exactly what Peter said to do.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that's what it says. So really I'm looking at the reasons why you believe what you I'm looking at epistemology essentially, because I find epistemology fascinating, and I find the reasons why people believe what they believe fascinating. Like I'm always fascinated by flat earthism, why they believe this to be the case, and sort of why they think there's a massive conspiracy to sort of make the world into a globe when it's really it's just it doesn't that make you curious at all?
That's my secret addiction, the flat earth documentaries.
Right. It's that how did the mind get to lining these things up in such a way that something that is completely incongruous with reality, like it is not even approaching reality.
Well, that's a conspiratorial thing, I think, because you see a lot of this
Sure.
in right-wing political movements. There are certain percentage of the population, and a lot of times they're a lot more level-headed in things like business and home life, but for whatever reason, they just tend to believe conspiracies. They happen to believe conspiracies at a higher rate than other people. And I think that flat earth is like the pinnacle of that, the desire to believe in this ultimate conspiracy above all conspiracies, because it makes life more exciting. Think about this. If you were one of these people, I thought this when I first heard about it, I thought I envy these people, because imagine the experience that they're having. If you're one of these people and all of a sudden it dawns on you that the whole world's been lied to and your government's covering it up and space is fake or whatever, what kind of an experience that must be if you actually believe that. And I think it's a bit of an addiction. I think it's a bit of like forcing dopamine hits because you like the way that feels to believe things like that.
Well, I think it's a couple of reasons. I think it is a distrust of sort of institutions in society. I think they really distrust sort of space agencies and the government and all of those things, like you mentioned, the like extreme right wing, a QAnon people kind of thing. I do also think it is that dopamine hit. It's sort of, I have secret knowledge that you don't, you know, that I have this, you know, you're unaware of something I know. But a lot of it, I do have to bring this up. There is a massive overlap between young Earth creationists and flat earthers.
Oh, yeah,
and I've been running into that a lot.
Well, I'm not a young Earth creationist. I think you know that.
I don't think I did. I don't think I
okay.
did, because you're on Boland's channel, and I know he's, you know, sort of in the Hovind camp, and Hovind is definitely a young Earth
creationist. Stephen believes that the world is less than 10,000 years old.
Right, which I don't get that either. I think that is just as incongruent with reality as flat Earth. Maybe slightly less so.
Yeah, maybe slightly less. Yeah.
Yeah. So yerfers, as we call it. No, I'm only joking. Nobody says that, but I say yerfers. Yeah. So I don't. So when you say things like it must be nice to sort of, you know that you know you're on this flat Earth and everything's simple and everything's, you know, sort of, you don't have to think about orbital mechanics and everything's just, you know, what we see is what we get kind of thing, right? It kind of, I feel the same way when people talk about a God. I feel it must be really nice to think that we're not, you know, someone's protecting us and we're not going to be hit by an asteroid or, you know, have a virus get out of control and devastate anybody. And so I'm not leveraging the same thing about you, but I do think that way. Yeah, I do think that way, that must be nice. And people have said to me, well, don't you want to go to heaven? And my answer is usually, well, what I want is irrelevant. Like, reality doesn't care what I want. It just is. So I guess, yeah, there's that. I could say that. But I did touch on sort of a cataclysm, right? And I wanted to, and I'm trying to start a series and been failing miserably. I hate my series. I hate doing it. And I sound really fake. So, but it's on sort of the end of the world stuff. And I wanted to get your position on whether the world will end and whether that's a good thing.
Am I still breaking up, Mark? Can you hear me?
No, you're perfectly fine.
Okay. It keeps. I think it is on mine. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
So you wanted to get my thoughts on like apocalypse, end time prophecy, that sort of thing.
Yeah, eschatology. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So okay. Well, you said you were doing a series. So are you doing a series where you're sort of examining religious views on this? Is that the idea where you're commentating?
Yeah, I came across a video and I found it to be full of a lot of claims of sort of, we know the end of the world is happening because of this, and this.
Yeah.
Right. So these things. When I actually, and for some reason I was drawn to this, I investigated all the claims, and a lot of them were factually untrue and in most cases trivial kind of thing. Right. So I've recorded something on it. It's terrible. I'm not going to release it. I'm probably going to give another attempt this week. And I'm terrible in acting on camera kind of thing when I'm trying to record. Right? I'm much better.
Get the fan going and everything, you know.
Well, no, it's more I'm much better talking to people. Like I can be myself. I feel uncomfortable when I'm just by myself. I feel I'm very bad at it. You know, I'm good at debate. I'm good at talking to people. I'm good at, you know, having discussions. I'm terrible at actually making stuff by myself to present to others. Like, I don't know what it is. I'm not good at it. But my worry is, and here's my worry. My worry is that something will happen in the world that will threaten, it will be an existential crisis. Let's take climate change, for instance. That a significant amount of religious people will think is a good thing because it signifies the end of days. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Climate change is a very interesting one, to be honest with you. I'm glad you brought that up because I was trying to think of a starting point to speak from on this behalf. But
okay, sure.
So climate change is interesting because it see that most conservative, I'll use the phrase Christian in air quotes, but most conservative people in the Western world seem to think that climate change is a liberal hoax or whatever. And then a lot of the people on the left seem to think that it's the only issue that we're facing. And so it's one of those things that people argue about. Well, it's no doubt that the climate is changing. That's a fact. You know, it used to, you could say, well, it was in doubt whether we were causing it, but I don't even think you can say that anymore. I think it's pretty well in that we are causing it. So climate change is fairly established, and human intervention causing climate change to at least some major degree is fairly established. Now, the place where I would disagree with a lot of these conservatives, and I'm pretty conservative myself, is the scripture clearly says things like man would become overwise and destroy himself, and that God would destroy those that destroy the earth. And there's phrases like this scattered throughout the Bible, both testaments, to where like the idea of climate change should be expected by Christians. The idea that we're damaging the world and making it irreparable, that we're going to pay the consequences for that, we should be expecting that. We should consider that confirmation of a sort.
Of the end of days kind of thing.
Well, it just said things like that was going to happen, you know, and climate change is almost like literally spot on to what the author was writing about. You almost couldn't think of a better example than the changing climate to express that. I mean, it was just like when I first
biological weapons, nuclear weapons.
Well, those things,
I mean, it could be,
but I think like
interpreted.
change, like it's damaging the ecosystem, which is going to cause a bunch of weird chain reactions that we can't expect. And it's going to mess with the food system. It's going to mess with all the stuff. You know, it's going to mess things up. In 20 years, if we don't do something, we're going to have trouble. A lot of the equatorial regions are going to be uninhabitable. They say 20 years, maybe 40 years, but I mean, it's coming. You know, cities like Miami and Havana are going to be in trouble if things don't change. And so to me, like when I first researched that, I was like, oh, well, yeah, of course this is happening. You know, this makes sense. You know, man got too wise and made all these selfish decisions. Now he's got to live with them. And he wasn't moderate. He was excessive or lustful. And so now he's got to live with the consequences of it. You know, the Industrial Revolution is one of those things that we sort of romanticize it because we reap the benefits of it. But factory workers were treated like slaves. You know, especially in America, the Irish and the Italians were treated almost as bad as the slave class 50 years before them. And so this is the reason that we have all these social benefits programs now, is because eventually they petitioned the politicians to do something about this. So there were so many horrendous things that were involved in all of that. I don't know, I'm getting off a trail, but my point was climate change should have been expected by Christians, is my point.
But the point is climate change the end of days that they're talking about?
No.
Like, is that okay? All right. So I guess the first thing that I take issue with is you said all these changes that we didn't expect. We absolutely expected them. I was taught about this in high school. Like, it was called global warming then, until they realized that it wasn't universal warming, so it could cause fluctuations, and they sort of changed the name to more accurately represent what it was actually doing. But I learned about it back then, and the greenhouse effect kind of thing. I learned about that in high school, and you know, I'm 46, so that was over 20 years ago. So when you sort of say we didn't expect, it's like, no, we totally expected all of this stuff. What I was
trying to say was that the people who were involved in the Industrial Revolution didn't appreciate what they were doing.
Yeah, it's very hard to say. They may have known. That's the you know, what I think is part of the criminal part of it. Like, it wasn't like they weren't told by experts of what was going to happen. So
I don't know records. Is that a thing? I've never heard that.
Yeah, well, I mean, when at least in Australia, yeah. I mean, I was being taught in school as a sort of, you know, high schooler.
No, but I'm speaking of the Industrial Revolution, like back in the 20s and 30s.
Oh, yeah, but that isn't what contributed significantly to CO2 levels. It's more the advent of cars and, you know, modern industrialized stuff that really sent it, so like coal-fired power plants and things like that, you know.
Well, the advent of cars was really into the 1930s.
Yeah, but that wasn't really the Industrial Revolution. Well, I mean, I suppose partly it was the start. It was kind of but anyway.
Yeah,
but CO2 production sort of. I'm not even. Yeah, I mean, you could be right. They. No,
I'm not like super educated on this, but I do think that a lot of the damage was done before they fully understood it. I'm sure there were some scientists that were warning them, but only in the last 50 years have we really started taking scientists seriously, in my opinion.
Right. Well, I mean, some circles we still don't, I guess. So I guess it worries me that anyway, what I'll do is that we've actually been going for so long. I'm so sorry, Christian.
Yeah,
I'll
I
get
was
to the
late. And I
questions
feel
though.
bad about that. I'm sorry about that.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'll start on the questions. I don't want to keep you too long.
Sure.
I think it was Big Bad Mama that said, please ask Christian about his old Earth creationist evolution views. We've done old Earth creationist. You're not an a young Earth creationist. And evolution, how do you feel about that?
I don't really purport to know how old the world is. I know that most geologists believe it's 4.6 billion years old, and I certainly don't argue with them. I don't know as much as they do about it. I know that it's not 6,000 years old. So whatever I know about the Earth, when people say, "Are you an old Earth creationist?" I'm a person that accepts that the world's clearly not 10,000 years old, and my opinion about how old it is fairly vague and irrelevant. You know what I mean? As far as evolution, I do believe in special creation to an extent, but the evolutionary process is obviously true. And really, that's what evolution is, a process.
Yeah, so evolution doesn't cover how life started. So there's nothing that I can sort of say in theory, like in scientific theory, that conflicts that. There's a number of hypotheses about abiogenesis, but then you can add in panspermia, and there's nothing to say that. Right, and that's just kicking the can down, because that's got, totally understandable.
Actually, evolution is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. I
really?
feel every time that I talk about the sciences, I always feel an obligation to say I'm not an expert, but I do love biology, and like I'm a huge this is going to sound cliche, but I'm a huge Richard Dawkins fan. I read a lot of his books, and I've probably watched every seminar and lecture he's ever given just because I like him as a person. But one of my favorite things I ever read was when I read through The Selfish Gene. There was a version of that was published as like an anniversary edition called The Extended Selfish Gene, where it had 2 bonus chapters from the extended phenotype on the end. And so when I read through that, that is just, to me, one of the most beautiful things that the human mind has ever composed is The Selfish Gene. I just think it's such an awesome book. And it, I guess probably as a Christian, it causes me to look at nature with a lot more awe and wonder and grace, just to see just how intricately that things work and the ability that biology has to be malleable and to fit niches and things. So I'm sure that me and Professor Dawkins interpret that information differently, but I think we both appreciate it the same. But the cool thing about The Extended Selfish Gene is, the majority, I don't know if you've read it, but the majority of the book is about explaining altruism in nature. And so he looks at things like sterile female worker ants, things like that, because you have organisms like ants and termites who live an entire life and never make any attempt to reproduce their genes, which seems like it violates biological principles. But what it is, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but what it is the queen has an exact replica of the DNA. And so the sterile worker ants are contributing to another passing on the same genes that they have inside of themselves. And so it's explaining altruism in a reasonable way. So when The Selfish Gene was published, I think it was in 1976 when it was originally published, it took the biology world by storm. And these days it's almost like biology canon to look at memes and things like that. But when you read through the last 2 chapters in this bonus version of the extended phenotype, The Selfish Gene was written to laymen. It was written to people who were not educated in the sciences to help them follow along with what was the breaking edge of biology at that time. And also for him to express the theory of memes and things like that. So the extended phenotype, rather, was written to the intelligentsia. It was written to his colleagues.
Yeah.
And so when you read those 2 chapters, first off, they're very hard to keep up with. It's almost like reading Darwin. It's like, oh my God. But if you're able to keep up, you get his real thoughts on it. And Richard Dawkins has got a brain. He's got to be a modern day Einstein is the only way I know how to say it, because have you ever heard him talk about moths flying into candle flames? Have you ever listened to him give a lecture on that?
No, I haven't. I mean, I like Richard Dawkins. I think I don't agree with him on everything, but I mean, to say he's a legend in his field, absolutely. There is no question about it.
He tells this, and I'm not sure if this was originally his theory or if he just developed upon it. I don't know the answer to that, but he talks about how a lot of insects navigate based on starlight or moonlight, because those things exist at a level of optical infinity, and so they can use them as reliable compasses. So they evolved in such a way to where their subconscious is not the right word, but the parts of their brain are running, and they're importing that data.
Instinctual,
right? Instinctual, correct. So that's going on. Well, then you have the advent of fire with humanity, candles, torches, etc., to where these moths and these different insects they're not able to develop and modernize quickly enough to keep up with the changing world because of human intelligence. And so what happens is they fly towards the candle in this very accurate logarithmic spiral that only makes sense if you assume that they were operating at an optical infinity assumption. And so to me, I don't think my brain has the power to have figured that out. So when I hear somebody articulate that, I just think it's so beautiful. And I'm sure
amazing.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just one of those things. Like, oh my God, like, who is this guy? But my thoughts on evolution is that it's very interesting to answer the question.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and he would have, sort of performed experiments, tried to figure it out, and just, some of the leaps. It has been said we stand on the shoulders of giants to sort of get to the next iteration, and he's working upon, obviously, what Darwin came up with, but Darwin got some stuff wrong, kind of thing. Of course he did. He was a product of his time. So when people say, hey, Darwinism, and it's like, we don't kind of do Darwinism anymore. We do. I believe the current model is integrated synthesis, which integrates everything into one sort of model. So,
well, for one,
and it's
genetics. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. So there's a whole lot in there. I'll push on through these questions. I had them a second ago. So second question: Does the amount of belief affects a person's behavior validate said belief? For instance, a lucky charm or something could affect one's behavior. Does that validate the charm?
That's an interesting way to phrase that question. I think it validates, or validates is not the right word, but I think that it makes evident the person's belief in the charm. Like if you have somebody, I don't want to pick on Islam, but if you have somebody who pulls a cord and blows themselves up, you have to agree that that person's pretty convinced at some level. Maybe a lot of that's delusion, or maybe a lot of it's just compulsion, but I think you would have to make the case that a lot of it's just that they flat out believe it. And so when a person carries a lucky charm and that causes them to carry themselves with an air of confidence, which does lead to better fortune, for lack of a better term, then that at the very least validates the fact that that individual believes in that lucky charm, and that their brain is doing things that are creating what you would consider a confirmation bias, causing them to develop a greater confidence in the lucky charm. And I think this is the consequence of religion generally.
But that doesn't actually validate the charm. It invalidates it as a cause. And I would put to you, and I'm not trying to be insulting, but I would say that the sort of bomber that pulls the cord is using the same justification for their beliefs that you are. They're using faith.
No, I can understand how it would look. I mean, I'm not arguing with your position. I'm simply saying you and I have had two different experiences. If you had the experiences that I have had, you would be on my side of the table. I feel very confident saying that.
But you don't like to talk about those experiences, do you?
Well, I'm happy to discuss them. I don't think that they're particularly productive in the sense of trying to persuade somebody to join your side of the fence, but they could help a person understand you, maybe.
Right. Well, I mean, when you sort of, it's just, I think I've talked to you about this before, and you were very reluctant to talk about the actual specifics, because I'm just curious on what that experience is and whether I would find it compelling if I was in that situation or not. I've had a few experiences where people have said, oh, well, doesn't that make you think of that a God? And I've said, well, no. And they've sort of said, well, that would make me think that there's a God. And I'm like, one was, I sort of was almost drowned, and something in the back of my mind sort of told me where the surface of the water was and swam towards it, kind of thing. I don't see that as a God. I don't have any reason to think it was a God and not just, sort of intuition kind of thing, just a feeling. And in sort of a panicked moment, sometimes intuition can be helpful for making a very quick decision rather than rational thought. But I've got no reason to think that. But people sort of said to me, hey, that's God. And it's sort of like, well, how do you know? Like,
Yeah, I don't think really that's the kind of experience that was persuasive to me. I'm probably
right.
aligned with you on
But
that.
this is why I'm curious,
Well, I've had
sort of,
numbers
so
of
what,
experiences like what you're describing, like in my life, to where things I should have gotten killed or I should have gotten seriously injured, and for some weird little
right,
reason, I
right.
didn't. I never found those particularly persuasive. That there were instances where after I was converted, I looked back at those and I thought, well, maybe that was the Lord looking out for me. But those kind of things would never have converted me. I'm probably like you in the sense that that's not the kind of experience that would have caused me to think differently in that way. I guess it's all about whatever you want to hear. I mean, do you want to hear about conversion? Do you want to hear about healing? What kind of specific experience do you want me to elaborate on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just sort of what convinced you in the first place? Like, what actually convinced you that this was real, or did you put your faith in it first and then sort of these things occurred?
Okay, so like my conversion story, that's what you're asking?
Sure, why not? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I didn't know if you were asking for an instance of divine healing or something like that. That's the reason I was trying to clarify. Yeah, I'll be happy to tell that. So I think I might have told you last time. I don't remember if I did or not, but I was an atheist growing up. And I mean, I was a kid, so when I say atheist, I was just a kid that didn't believe in God. You know, I didn't have any adult experience, but I was fairly persuaded that there was no God and that religion was a lie. As much as a 17-year-old can be, you know what I mean? But I was involved in sort of like the culture of heavy metal, where it's sort of out of fashion to believe in God, anyways. But I had a very negative outlook on religion because I just saw it as a bunch of con men trying to get money, which most of it is. I haven't changed so much in that regard. But what happened was really quite strange. My grandfather, who I did not know growing up, besides just seeing him a time or two when I was 4 or 5, was a minister. And he was an old-fashioned, old-time holiness preacher. I don't know if that means anything to you, but
And
very
this was the
conservative.
George Pike.
Yes, George
Yeah.
Pike. Yeah, he was just an old-fashioned conservative guy. He was, long pants, long sleeves, clean shaved. His wife was long dressed, long hair. They were just old-fashioned Christian people. They were straight out of the 1800s. His church was extremely conservative. Well, I didn't know any of that growing up. My dad we never had a Bible in the house, never said a prayer, never went to a church service, never talked about God. It was just as absent as religion can be. I understood later on in life why that was, but at the time, of course, I didn't think anything about it. But the way we were raised, there was just no talk of religion. It was just absent. It just wasn't a part of our life. And my granddad died before I ever turned 6 years old, so I didn't know him, and so I just wasn't raised around it. And so my secular friends from public school were more religious than I was because they went to church on Thanksgiving with their family. I was like just completely non-religious at all. Well, my granddad had this big church property where they had some buildings, some houses, a big church, a big benevolence center, a place for printing literature, just a big facility. Back then, some of the holiness churches had like what they called campgrounds, where the people would buy these big plots of land and just kind of have like their houses and their church facilities all on the same property, and they would just sort of work together. And it was almost like a commonwealth, like a commune. And so that was sort of a big movement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and he was involved in that.
Right.
Yeah. So a bunch of the folks who followed him lived right there around the property and all worked together in the literature and the ministry affairs. And he traveled around the world to different countries preaching and stuff like that. And so they kind of had their own little thing going. Well, around 2007, the people who were carrying on the work at that church had some legal disagreements with my aunts and uncles, my family, over what to do in certain situations with the property. And so what happened was they just decided to leave and go start a church somewhere else. And my family had to come back and take over the responsibilities of maintaining the grounds there and figuring out what the heck to do with this big piece of property that's all of a sudden abandoned. So it was a very unique situation. So we moved to one of the small houses that were on the site that had just been recently vacated because my dad and them were just trying to get their bills down so they could deal with this big property situation. They started scrapping copper lines and doing whatever they could to come up with money to pay the taxes. And it was a very strange transitional time in our life. And I'm sure it was for the folks who left as well. My wife from the group of people that left. But so me and her were kind of like Romeo and Juliet when we got together. But so all of a sudden I'm 17 years old and we moved from our house to this church basically. And my dad and my aunts and my uncles who were involved in this decided to open the church up on Sunday mornings because my grandmother was very distraught because of the division. And she said, one thing that your dad always wanted was for the church to be open on Sunday mornings. So whatever you do, keep it open on Sunday mornings. And this is a big situation. So they decided to keep it open on Sunday mornings while they figured out what the heck. And so there was no pastor. So they would just find ministers that could come through and fill up the spot and then just hope somewhere down the road that something worked out. Basically, they were playing it by ear. So the whole time, I'm a singer in a black metal band. I'm a staunch anti-theist. I'm dripping in black top to bottom. And for the first time in my life at 17 years old, my dad's like, hey, you got to come to the services on Sunday morning. And so I would just go up in the sound room and like hide and play on stuff and roll my eyes because the people would go out on the front of the church because it's a Pentecostal church. They would go down for prayer and things like that. And I just thought that was just the dumbest thing ever. And I'd never seen it. I'd never been around it. It was strange to me. And the only churches I had ever visited was like, if I stayed the night with my friend on Saturday night and his mom made us go to church on Sunday morning, it was like a big contemporary Joel Osteen kind of church where everybody goes and drinks coffee and hears a little Bible story. So the idea of these old conservative Pentecostal churches where they have prayer and all this kind of stuff, it was just, I can't explain to you how foreign it was to me. It was just the whole other side of the planet, you know? And so I would hide up in the sound room on Sunday mornings and just basically whine at dad about having to go. And there was a few people who didn't leave the church. There was a brother, an older gentleman who lived there on the grounds named Larry Allen. There was one of my uncles that was married to one of my aunts named Tim. There was another very elderly gentleman that was friends with my grandfather named Jimmy Kirk. And there was a handful of people that hung around. Everybody else left. And those people took an interest in me and began to talk to me and began to try to spend time with me or just ask me about how my day was. And like, they treated me as though they had always known me. I didn't know who they were, but they were such staunch admirers of my grandfather that anybody who was related to him, they were just like, hey, you're family to us. That's how much we thought about him. So these people treated me just like I was family, though I'd never known them before. And so I became friends with some of these people and they became role models of mine. And I realized there's something different about these people. These were very clean-cut people. They didn't cuss. They didn't drink. They didn't smoke. The ladies dressed like ladies. The men dressed like gentlemen. They were not like the Christian people that I had bumped into along the way. They were very, very, almost somebody from your perspective might even say cultish. They were very, very old-fashioned. And they were very, very loving and kind and modest and meek and humble. And there was just something very charming about them that I couldn't shake. And so I had a few times where I would have conversations about religion with some of these older people. And I would just ask them questions like, what do you believe and why? And they would tell me stories of their life, or they'd tell me something that happened or whatever. So I came to the conclusion, these are some really good people. And I've misjudged these people. There's something about them that when I took this anti-theist stance and this anti-religion stance, I was not accounting for whatever this element is that they have that I've found intriguing. And so I decided to read the Bible because I thought, well, I pretty much hated this book for the last 5 or 6 years. And I've talked about how bad it was. And I've never really given it a fair shake. I mean, I know some of the things that it says 'cause I live in America, but I've never really broken open and read it. So I was like, well, you know, these people got something that I like. So I'll read it. That's fair. I'll read it. And so I sat down one day in that house to read. And for whatever reason, I don't remember why, but I started with the Gospel of St. Matthew. And I had a King James version. That's still what I read to this day. I prefer the King James version. And for whatever reason at the time, I had a King James version. And I read the book of Matthew in one sitting. It's 28 chapters. It took me a few hours. And I just remember reading it cover to cover. And I remember thinking when I got done, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever read in my life. And I don't think it's so much that I was surprised by it, because when you live in America, you hear little things here and there where you sort of know what's in the gospel, bits and pieces. I don't think it was that. It was just that reading it consistently from cover to cover with this open mind, with this interest in something that these people had that I wasn't accounting for, reading the entire thing in one setting, I read the story of the life of Christ in its fullness in that gospel with this in mind, with this open-mindedness that was new to me. And the character of Christ as it's portrayed in Matthew was enough to really make me curious, because I thought, I don't like any of the stuff I've ever seen at churches. I don't like any of the ministers I've ever met, but I like this. Whatever he's saying, it's like taking the good in Buddhism and leaving the rest. And it's like taking the good in LaVeyan Satanism and leaving the rest. And all the philosophies that I had ever been interested in, it was like he was taking the good and leaving the rest. And so from that point, I started to read the scriptures more and more. And the second book I ever read was the book of Revelation, which was a mistake. But I started to pray after that. I would go to the woods because I was big on camping. I had a tent. I'd go to the woods for a couple of days at a time. So I'd go to the woods and I would pray. And I would ask God things. I would say, I want to understand this, or I want this to happen, or I want to feel this certain way, or I want this situation resolved. And there was numbers of times where seemingly within a week or two, whatever it was that I requested came to pass. And it got to where it wasn't even a request anymore. It was just, God, I want to feel peace. I want to feel a confidence that this is the right track. I want someone to cross my path that I can be a blessing to in the same way those people were a blessing to me. And then that kind of stuff started to come to pass. And the rest of the story would involve explaining to you what it feels like to have an experience with the Spirit of God. And I don't think that words can do that justice, but that's basically the story of my conversion.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I would find it sort of there's nothing in there that would convince me, having done the same, that there would be a God responsible for all of that. Sort of like I said with affirmations, if I said, hey, God, I want this, and then went out to actively get it, I don't see how God's involved if you're actively trying to do it.
See, I don't believe that. I think that if you had had the experience, you would have taken the same position.
Okay. Well, I certainly can't comment on the experience. But,
no, I mean, I can't either. I can't obviously know that.
Yeah. So I certainly can't, because I can never know what experiences you've had. You can never know what experiences I had. There's a failure to sort of translate it. I just, but thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. That was from Blastermaster, who also Blastermaster sort of he pointed out that there was some verses that you could take in the Bible to mean sort of omnipotence and omniscience and things like that. Would you disagree that there are verses in the Bible that you could take to mean that? If you want, I can go.
I wouldn't blanket disagree with that. I'm sure that there are some instances where I would agree with that. The problem I have is that people sort of spout out those 5 and 6 omni terms all together in a cluster. And I think that instead of saying, okay, well, this one makes sense because of this, it's just sort of assumed that they all make sense.
Well, it's usually 3.
Well, omnipotence is all powerful or all knowing. I'm sorry. Yeah. Omnipresent is, all present. And then what is the third one?
Yeah. Well, it's omniscience, which is all knowing. Omnipotence, which is all powerful. Yeah.
Well, omnipotence is all powerful, and all powerful seems to be assumed to mean that you can do anything, right? So, like the first thing that comes to mind is there's a scripture in the New Testament that says it's impossible for God to lie, which means he can't lie. And there's an example in the Old Testament where God needed to deceive some people and he couldn't even do it himself. He had to send the devil to do it. And so I think that would dispel the idea of omnipotence if he's powerless to lie. And the scripture says that he is powerless to lie.
Well, I think to me that would be a contradiction, because it's sort of, there's things saying, hey, God has infinite power.
Where does it say that, though? See, I think that's an assumption. I don't think there's anywhere that says that God can just do anything. The scripture actually says that he can't lie, but I don't think it says the other thing.
I can't go back that far, but there was something.
Yeah, maybe there's a certain verse that he wanted me to comment on,
Yeah, so Psalm 139:6, indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Luke 12:7, God knows everything about our
doesn't say that he can do everything.
And cares. Sorry?
The one in Psalms doesn't say anything about he can do everything. It just says that he knows all the hairs on your head.
Well, I mean, that's sort of one of the things that you could take to be omniscience kind of thing, like being aware of
omniscience is a little bit different. I could probably go along with omniscience. I don't think I could go along with omnipotence, but I could probably go along with omniscience. The only thing I would disagree on omniscience is that God sort of testifies that he would limit his own ability to know things, because part of the idea of the new heaven and the new earth and the transfigured body of a Christian after the whole thing's said and done is that former things, as far as sins, weaknesses, transgressions, faults and failures, heartaches, that would not be remembered in the new world. So I think that God purposely limits his own ability to know in the finality of this thing. So maybe that questions omniscience. It's just when people say those things, I don't think they account for all of this.
Well, I think that sort of God knows everything about our lives sort of suggests an omniscience, but I'm not sure if sort of God knows what it's like to lie if he can't lie.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying is there may be a modicum of truth to that, but the word, people are so hard lined and rigid with those words, and I just don't think the scriptures bear that out.
But you don't yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to, I said to Blaster Master I'd bring that up. But that certainly could be inferred from some of the scriptures. And I think a lot of it is inference. It sort of is what you take out of it. So I certainly can't say you're wrong. I don't really have a sort of dog in the race at all. But if your interpretation isn't like that, then that's fine. Sorry,
I just don't feel compelled to believe that. I don't think of God as having any more or less value by being omnipotent. It's just not something that enters my mind. I believe that he does what he says he does, and that he will do what he says he will do, and nothing outside of that is really interesting to me.
So a word that it's brought up a lot is maximally powerful. Right. So God can do anything except that which is against his nature, essentially.
I don't even think I agree with that.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, that'd be a whole conversation, to be honest with you, because the problem is that just making the assumptions that the scripture says that he's all these things are just that, they're assumptions. And there are numbers of passages that I could probably within 10 minutes in a short Google search, I could challenge every bit of that. It just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that I feel compelled to believe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's fine. I'm certainly not saying that you have to believe any of this.
No, it's an interesting question. I've had that question in the past, and I've told people in the past that it doesn't take long to bring up a couple of verses that call that into question. And like I always ask people, why do you feel compelled to believe that? Why do you feel compelled to believe that God is omnipotent? What is it that's compelling you to believe that?
Well, I mean, Blastmasters, I'm going to be bombarded by them. Matthew 19:26.
Very much of me.
Jesus said to them, with people, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. He says that sounds like a claim of omnipotence.
Oh, that's a good one. That would be a good conversation to have on that one. What is I guess I would have to look and see what the chapter's saying there, but I mean, that may be a case for that. The problem with that, like I said, is that it literally says in plain black and white that he cannot lie. And if lying is a thing that an omnipotent being could do, then therefore, by that definition, at least, he's not omnipotent.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. I would probably agree with you that there would be a contradiction between the interpretation of that, the way that Blastermaster is, and a God that can't lie. I would say that would be a contradiction. But if you're not interpreting it like that, I don't see any reason to force you into.
No, I would have to go read the verses before and after that to make sure I'm seeing the context of the scripture. I'm sure it'd be a great conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Next question: if you subscribe to Darwinian evolution as described in mainstream science, how does this mesh with you scripturally? Why would God take such an indirect approach, indirect long-term approach? I'm sorry.
Well, I have a bit of a different take on the Darwinian process than secular biologists. I don't think that Charles Darwin ever discovered common ancestry of all life. I think he assumed that. I believe in the things that he discovered, but I don't believe in the long-term assumptions that he made. Charles Darwin wrote in his later life that he felt as though all living organisms were related. Well, he certainly didn't know that, nor did he discover that. And it wouldn't be for many, many years that genetics would even come in to infer that. And so I believe in the things that he discovered, but I don't believe in the things that he believed about his discoveries. Charles Darwin knew that life was malleable. He knew that things descended and changed over time. That's not the same thing as knowing that all things have a common ancestor. He believed that because as a secular biologist, that's what made sense to him. But even the data that seems to infer that wasn't available in his time.
Well, sure, but we've sort of since confirmed that.
We have since made that a much stronger thing to believe.
Right. But do you believe that?
Do I believe that all life descends from a common ancestor naturally?
Yeah.
No. No, I believe in special creation.
So by special creation, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that the start of life was created, or that there was groups of things created?
Groups of things. Yes, that's what I mean.
Okay.
I believe in the Darwinian process really to the fullest extent of what we know to be true about it. But I do believe that to say that all groups, you could trace them back to a common ancestor, would violate certain scriptural passages. So I have to concede that there must have been at least a few individually created groups that are not naturalistically related.
Okay, so we got to have a conversation about this, and most specifically, do you think that humans and apes came from a common ancestor?
You know, I'm a little on the fence on that one. I veer towards no. I think it's very possible that humans and Australopithecines do.
Well, yeah, but humans and Australopithecines having a common ancestor. Yeah, that's
I'm not
true.
saying I know that they do. I feel inclined to believe that they do.
But I'm more talking about the extant apes, like great apes, like chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas.
I don't take a hard position on that, Mark, at this point. That's something that I've been thinking about for the last few years and trying to develop a more well-rounded opinion about. As it sits right now, I don't believe that humans and orangutans and chimpanzees have a common ancestor, but I'm not super rigid on that. I'm sort of still fleshing that one out.
Well, maybe we can have a conversation about that sometime, because there's a whole, like, I could talk for hours upon that, and especially
that's also something that I like to study as well. Yeah.
Well, endogenous retroviruses are one of the things that I absolutely adore, and how we know that we have a virus that infected an ancestor due to us sharing a remnant of a virus with fish. Basically, we've got the same thing in us. It's absolutely fascinating. Yes. So I think there's a lot of evidence for that. So you're sort of aware that science says that we all have a common ancestor, every living thing on the planet.
No, even Charles Darwin believed that back before genetics seemed to imply it. I mean, so he was a naturalist, and so you have to think, as a naturalist, when you see life diversifying, you just put that in rewind, and that's the common thing that you come to. The idea of believing that there were especially created groups is the radical position. The naturalistic position is the common sense position.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the theory of evolution, that's what it states. So when somebody says, like, do you accept evolution, and you say yes, you don't that's not exactly true. Christian, I
think you and I disagree on that, Mark. The theory of evolution is the Darwinian process, and I believe in the Darwinian process.
No, the theory of evolution is the entire integrated synthesis model that we have at the moment. That is a tree of life.
You're speaking of neo-Darwinism. I don't fully accept neo-Darwinism.
Okay, but that's the theory of evolution. That is the theory of evolution.
It is the theory of evolution in light of modern neo-Darwinism.
No, but that's sort of saying that germ theory is how it was originally discovered. No, it's moved on since then.
What I'm saying is, when I say I accept the theory of evolution, what I'm saying is I accept what Charles Darwin discovered to be true. If you're saying the theory of evolution in the sense of, do you accept modern neo-Darwinism, my answer to that question would be no.
Well, it's not neo-Darwinism, it's integrated synthesis.
That may be the current model now, but I understand what you're saying.
Right. So that's the current model. So it's kind of, to me, when you say you accept evolution, is that you accept the current model of evolution, the model where everything descends to one common ancestor.
No, I don't accept that, and I don't think that is what he discovered. So maybe I should have worded that different. When I say I accept the theory of evolution, I might have been speaking in a more common sense. What I was saying is I believe that Charles Darwin's discoveries about the diversity of life were correct.
Yeah. Okay. So you sort of accept some aspects of the theory of evolution, because Darwin, the theory of evolution isn't what Darwin came up with. That's not what it is anymore. it's what its current iteration is.
Oh,
It's what
I
we have
understand.
added to it. So to me that seems kind of a bit odd, but that's okay. But I think I would put it to you as you sort of suggested that you would adhere to science, but in this case you're sort of having a faith-based position override what the science says.
Well, that's honestly, Mark, that's my case in all positions. Now, I don't think that the science bears out common ancestry for all life. That's where you and I would materially disagree. But I do understand that that is the common modern position. And that really was Darwin's position, even though it wasn't as fleshed out back then. That's what he privately believed and in his later life publicly believed.
Right. But I mean, I can point to people like Francis Collins that sort of says, that he was a very devout Christian. And he said, it would be great for me as a Christian if the theory of evolution were not true, but it is so. There is no question about. And he was a sort of theist that worked on a very devout Christian who worked on the Human Genome Project. Amazing geneticist.
Yeah.
And his contributions cannot be understated.
Sure.
But he, like when you work on something like the Human Genome Project and you work on other animals' genomes, that there is an insurmountable conclusion that presents itself.
No, I am aware of genetics inferring common ancestry. I am aware of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, according to him, it doesn't just infer it; it is unavoidable in that geneticist's opinion. But I mean, this we've gone like this for ages, but
yeah,
maybe we should have a conversation about it.
I think unavoidable is a bit of a stretch, but I do understand the strong case they make for it.
Yeah. It's just I guess I'm just pointing out that is one case where when you sort of say, hey, I take the scientific position, that isn't the scientific position.
That's not exactly what I said. I should have worded it different. What I meant to what I said was I believe in the theory of evolution. What I meant to say was I believe that Charles Darwin accurately discovered the ability of life to be malleable and that this process explains biodiversity. That's what I meant to express by that.
Okay. I'll go on to the next question because this is going to turn into a long conversation and I'm not ready for it. And I feel a bit off, to be honest with you, because I'm just getting over a cold. Like, seriously, it's been bugging me all week. Next question is, how many people pray to be healed and are not?
I don't know if anybody has the answer to that question.
I don't think anybody does. Yeah, and that's a very good answer.
I'm sorry to disappoint on that question.
Oh, and Blastomas is saying thanks for engaging with the questions and verses, and he doesn't know many Christians that don't think God is omnipotent. Yeah, I would agree. Although Blaster, I would say that a lot of them do say, "Hey, it's maximally powerful." Sort of. So
I've never heard that phrase till you said it. That's an interesting phrase.
I think it comes from William Lane Craig, sort of to say that God, because when people say omnipotent, they then sort of are confronted with the paradoxical things like, can God create a stone he can't lift, or can God create a hot dog that he can't eat, or whatever?
Well, that's why, to me, like the assumptions of omnipotence, it's almost like why even add that? What's the meaning of even including that? Unless you read in the scriptures that you have to believe that or it's consistent. Right. Like, I just don't see the purpose of it. You know what I mean? I believe that he is whatever he said he was, and that he's not whatever he said he was not.
Okay. And the last question is, please ask Christian, what percentage of Christians actually have their prayers answered, let alone how such statistics could even be definitively compiled?
What percentage of Christians have their prayers answered? To that part of the question, I would say 100%.
Yeah, so I guess what we're saying is the percentage of Christians that have prayers answered to the percentage that those same Christians
I understand. I understand the question.
Yeah.
That's not the question.
So if you pray for everything in your life, as some people I sort of see do, they sort of pray for everything. It's not a surprise when a percentage of it comes true. And I suppose they're pointing out there's no way to really get the efficacy of that without doing some sort of sampling against people that aren't praying and have things come true. I kind of think that like the fallacy that I said was the Texas sharpshooter, that you'll sort of say, oh, I prayed for that and it came back true. I prayed for that and it came through, and all of these things came true, but you won't be seeing the ones where you didn't pray. It's exactly the same principle as your
the reason I answered the question in a weird way is because when you say Christian, it depends on what you're saying. Is he saying people in the Western world who mark Christian on a government checkbox, or is he saying the children of God? Because the children of God are people whose only sincere prayer is eternal salvation, and that prayer is answered. So the question is sort of a nonsensical question unless you get serious about it.
So to me, this sounds like a sort of almost like a no true Scotsman, but I'll put that aside because I really want to investigate. Well, I really want to investigate what you mean by the children of God who will be saved kind of thing. How would we identify those people?
Well, you wouldn't.
Well, who would?
What would be the purpose of a secular person identifying the children of God?
Well, if the children of God are having their prayers answered with a greater frequency.
Not their prayers with a greater frequency, but their prayer.
Okay.
The scripture talks about the sincere prayer or heart's desire of a Christian. So their prayer, their only true sincere prayer, is to be united with their Heavenly Father. Everything else is frivolous.
But that's kind of completely unfalsifiable. We can't tell.
No, it is. It is unfalsifiable because that's what I meant. Why would it ever need to be proven to someone like you? The apostolic writings were for one Christian to greet another Christian. People like you were not even in the equation.
Well, because I'm curious, and I mean, does God even want me to believe?
If you're not one of his children, he could really care less.
Okay. Oh, I mean that's fair. Then. But according to you, he's already determined that ahead of time.
Well, I think there's a good chance you may very well be, but what do I know?
I don't know.
Well, what I mean is he's under no special obligation to during this timeline of life, during this thing that we call the world. He's under no special obligation to convince you of anything. He's pretty uninterested in the people who are not filled with his spirit. They're not people he's trying to convince of anything. He's secretly dealing with Christians so that he can secretly receive Christians so that he can destroy the world and get rid of it. So he's not trying to convince secular people.
How do you know all of this?
Well, it's just a faith in what the scriptures say. That's what they say.
Yeah, but I mean, I could think that I'm secretly a superhero and base that on faith. I don't see anything that I couldn't base on faith.
Does your experience bear that out?
Sure.
Your experience bears out that you're a superhero?
I can do a cartwheel, sure.
Can you fly?
Maybe briefly. I don't know. I haven't
Your
tried.
experience
But
does
what
not
I'm saying is
the difference.
What I'm saying is that if I had enough faith in that, right? If I had enough faith that is true, I could believe that, and that is the same justification that you're using.
But the difference is your experience is not bearing that out. Mine is.
Well, if I have faith that I could use laser eyes if I ever wanted to, but I don't want to yet. Why can't I believe that on faith?
Because there's never going to come a time where you actually use laser eyes, Mark.
Well, is there ever going to come a time in your life when you're going to get this confirmed for you?
I've had numbers of things confirmed. We've already discussed some of them.
Yeah. I just don't see them as great evidence.
But that's because it's convenient for you to dismiss them, Mark.
I don't think it's convenient. I mean, I don't think sort of saying, hey, I'm going to just die and fade away and sort of become nothing is convenient for me. I think that on the whole,
that's not what I said. I said it's convenient for you to dismiss what you would consider anecdotal evidences. But what I'm telling you is that your faith in being a superhero is never going to be confirmed by your own real life experiences, whereas many of the things I've set my faith to has already been confirmed. So we're having two different series of experiences, one that leads to a confidence in the belief and one that does not. So they're very different. It's not a good analogy.
Well, actually, I have caught stuff that shouldn't be caught because I have very good reflexes. And
That's a superhuman thing to have very good reflexes.
Yeah, superhuman. But I could have faith that is so, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I could have faith that is so.
Sure.
That if I'm, good at catching things, it's not because I juggled for a long period of my life. It's because I have superpowers, and I could have faith that is so.
If you had honestly not juggled, and then all of a sudden that began to materialize for no other seeming reason than the faith, then I could see that building a confidence. That's not your experience, though.
But doesn't matter, because all I can say is, well, I have faith that it was to do with me becoming a superhero, not because of this other reason.
But
there is
problem
nothing that faith
happen.
can't justify.
But the experience didn't bear it out. I think you're missing that point.
Well, none of your experiences kind of bared it out either.
No, they did. I set my faith for
always
specific things that happened, so they did.
Yes, that faith was always involved. So if I said, okay, well, I'm going to have faith that if I juggle, I'm going to become a superhero. My reflexes are slightly better, and I see that, well, I have faith that they're superhero levels.
You're importing juggling, Mark. I didn't import anything.
It doesn't matter.
No, it does matter. You're importing the practicing of a talent. I'm not importing anything except for the faith in the thing. You're adding this extra element of doing something to get there. I didn't do that.
Well, yeah, you did. You gave faith in people. You read the Bible. You described to me sitting down and reading the Bible, feeling like it meant something very, very, deep and very important to you, and liking what you had in there, and then reading more chapters, and then you went out and practiced that religion in a way. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did change your behavior in all of that.
No, I set my faith for certain individual faith items, you might say items, certain individual things that I was aspiring for. And then those things happened. So it's not that I practiced to get better at something. It's that I said, if you want me to believe in you, please bring this across my path. And then this was brought across my path. That's very different than juggling to get better at something. Like, I'll give you an example. I had really bad acid reflux that God healed me of, to the point where I quit taking medicine in an instant and it went away. I know you want to dismiss that like you always do, but it's not dismissible. Mm-hmm. I put faith in an item, and that item came to pass. I didn't do anything. I didn't start eating any different. I didn't do anything that caused it to happen. So it's not like the juggling analogy. There is a difference in setting your faith to something and then it just happens.
Yeah, and I want you to look into placebo effect
for acid reflux disease, Mark.
Yeah, actually, I think
you dismiss these things because you don't want to delve into them.
Well, no, there was a video of Veritasum, and they got, was it Veritasum? They got children and basically told them that a MRI machine would cure them. And the thing is, the MRI machine wasn't an MRI machine. It was just a machine that made noise. And basically put them in it. And one person's skin condition cleared up. Okay, I'm not even joking. Okay, one person's
I
skin
understand there are
condition
certain instances where the placebo effect certainly has an effect on brain chemistry and everything else. It's not going to heal acid reflux disease or stage 4 lung cancer, Mark, for God's sake.
Well, I never said stage 4 lung cancer. No, it was Vsauce. Okay. Vsauce. I'll put it in the private chat. I'm serious. Like, placebo effect is incredibly powerful.
It is incredible, but it doesn't like regrow limbs. It has limits, Mark.
Have you seen a limb regrown?
No, I'm just saying there are things medically that the placebo effect is not going to heal. Otherwise, then you could just tell people to go believe in
homeopathy. Of course. No, I'm not suggesting that it does, but it has an effect on the body more than what you would think it does.
On certain things, that's true.
Sure. Acid reflux may be one of them. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't acid reflux stress related as well as physical?
I don't really know what caused mine because, like I said, I never actually made any changes to identify certain factors because it just went away overnight when I quit.
Yeah, so acid reflux is heartburn, right? It's when the acid from the stomach burns the food intake, basically. I believe. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's kind of like that. It is heartburn, but it's like an accelerated heartburn because what happens is, have you ever had real bad heartburn?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, it's a horrible thing. So what happens is when you have heartburn, your stomach acid is just sort of churning in your gut, and the walls of your stomach lining have become weak. And so you experience this extreme discomfort because of this. Acid reflux disease, to the best of my remembrance, it's been a while since I read about this, but acid reflux disease is when that stomach acid actually begins to reflux up to where you're almost dry heaving and throwing up stomach acid that reaches the top of your throat. So all the discomfort you were feeling in your stomach, you're now feeling all the way up your throat. And I mean, mine got bad enough where I was actually coughing the stuff up, which is really horrible, but it's just a horrible thing. And it's not healed by the placebo effect. But I understand what you're saying. There's no doubt that there's certain kinds of brain chemistry that the placebo could cause that could have an effect on things like anxiety and stress, and probably certain physical conditions that are caused by those things. But this is a really materially existing thing. Like it has effects on the stomach lining. Like it's a real thing. It's not just caused like because you feel bad.
Well, I mean, watch that placebo video. Just do me a favor and watch it and see what happened to some of those children that believed this machine would cure their symptoms. And it brings up an amazing ethical question of, should we lie to people and give them placebos, which is incredibly unethical. So, yeah, it's really fascinating.
That's interesting that you would frame that as incredibly unethical. I mean, I would agree, but probably for totally different reasons. Because I would assume, and I mean, this is an assumption, but I would assume that from your position, you would think that maybe it was ethical because of the results.
No, I think it's unethical to lie to patients about the treatment that they're getting, right? So if you're giving somebody a pill, then it should be one that's been medically tested to have an effect.
That's unethical if it works.
Because we don't generally, because there's too many people and there's too much of a compulsion to give people fake medicine, lie to them to make a profit through.
Oh, so it's another thing. You're saying that most of the time it's not going to work.
No.
Well, let's say theoretically, if it did work, would you then say it was okay?
If it did work, is it okay?
That's kind of what I'm trying to get at is your ethics here, because if you knew the placebo was going to have the desired effect, would it then become ethical?
But the placebo is given in medical studies to see if the belief in something is actually there, is the thing causing it, or whether it is simply the pharmacological
I think it is
pharmacological effects of the medicine itself. Like, we have to be giving medicine that gives physical effects to people.
No, but that's not what I know. That's true, but what I'm saying is I'm trying to understand your position on ethics here. If you had a degree of confidence that the placebo was going to be effective, would you think it's ethical?
But you can't. That's all to do with the mind of the person you give it to.
Okay, so your ethics position here is just based on your confidence in whether it's going to work or not. It's just too much of a dice roll.
Right. Because it all depends on whether they believe it's going to work or not and how deeply they believe.
That's what I was trying to understand when you said the word ethical. I'm just trying to understand your ethics on this because I think it's interesting.
Yeah. So if you give somebody a sugar pill and tell them it's life-saving medicine, it may work. It may not. That's the thing. Like, it may be something trivial like asthma or something, or a skin condition, and it may not work at all. It really does depend on the person, the ailment, a lot of different factors. So when we're looking at placebos, it may cause a slight increase in the number of people, getting over this, and probably more than we think. But is it ethical to give that to somebody knowing that it makes no physical change whatsoever, and telling them in the hope that tricking them into it is going to cure them by them sort of sort of healing themselves through a trick of the mind? It's an ethical dilemma.
No, that's what I found so interesting in what you said, was because there's two sides of that. On one side, you're saying, are the ethics based upon the reliability of the placebo and the doctor's expertise in the particular condition that they're treating, or are the ethics based on the fact that it's just wrong to lie?
No, I don't think it's based upon that it's just wrong to lie. I think it's based upon when we are prescribing medicines, we cannot um, portray something as having a different effect than what it actually does. That way lies sort of medical fraud, essentially.
No, that's what I was trying to
Um,
figure. I figured that's what you were saying. I just didn't know if you were
Right.
saying you considered it unethical, regardless of the effectiveness of it, simply because it was dishonest. That's what I was trying to find out.
Well, it's more dishonest when it comes to matters of bodily autonomy and bodily integrity. So when I take in something, it is ethical and good for me to know what it is that I'm taking into my body, not to be lied to about that. That I would see as ethical on the part of the doctors. Now, I don't think placebos violate the Geneva Convention, because people sort of talk about the Hippocratic Oath. They don't use the Hippocratic Oath anymore. They use the Oath of Geneva, which is do what's in the best interest for your patient. Well, because the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm, and sometimes doctors have to do harm.
Sure, right.
You know, that they have to. You have to amputate a limb. You have to, hurt some. Sometimes it's just unavoidable. So the Geneva is the one that they do, and that is doing what's in the best interest of your patient. And that may be giving them a placebo. But if that person gets worse, and you're relying on a placebo, then you haven't done what's in the best interest for your patient. The best interest of your patient is to use a medically sound treatment that's based upon, scientific principles. That is the best thing for your patient.
No, that's what I thought you were saying. I guess it caught my interest, because at first I thought that maybe you were taking the position that anything that is dishonest at all is unethical. And I just was thinking I'm probably reading that wrong, because that would be much more of a religious position. And I know that you're not a religious person.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that being honest is so I'm sort of, I believe in the circumstances are important, a relativist. So if you're being, I think it's advantageous. It's good for your well-being to be honest with people you're engaging with, people around you, the rest of society. That's beneficial for your well-being. However, I think that if you're at gunpoint and a bank robber's sort of saying, or some murderer is saying, where do you live, where does your family live, I think lying's perfectly moral in that situation, kind of thing.
I understand.
I don't hold
I was just interested
to virtue ethics. Yeah.
Well,
so
there's a lot of reasons for being honest and being a good citizen. I mean, you could make a perfectly reasonable case from a Darwinian point of view that people should be model citizens in their societies. That's not the reason that I do it. You know what I mean? Like, I recognize that one could make the argument that there's a greater benefit for the future of your children, that your own genetics are going to benefit from it, et cetera, et cetera. You could make a good Darwinian case for it. That's not the reason that I would make the case for religious person. I would make the case lying is wrong.
Well, so to get back to where we'd medically look at the acid reflux, for instance, how do we tell the difference between something that is the placebo effect and something that was actually done by a deity of some sort? Like, how would we actually
can be made scientifically? I don't see how it would be. I don't see how you would begin to measure that.
Right. So you sort of take it on faith, and these events that sort of you put into place are sort of you taking these hits as, well, that's confirmation of my faith. But I guess I'm pointing out to you that you're ignoring the misses of the things that you pray for that don't come true.
Well, because some of these hits are impossible, like blaming the placebo effect on healing acid reflux disease. That'd be an example.
Well, as far as I know, that can be caused by stress. Why wouldn't the placebo effect be able to cure that?
Because it's even if stress was the cause, it would take quite a bit of time and a change in diet and possibly additional medications to rebuild the stomach lining. That doesn't happen overnight.
Oh yeah, I don't know that's true.
It is true.
How do you know? How do you know you rebuilt your stomach lining?
Because the effects went away literally overnight, Mark. That's not the way that a person recovers from acid reflux disease.
Okay, and so you went and saw medical professionals and they said, hey, you had no stomach lining, and then overnight it got repaired.
I was coughing up acid every night, 7 days a week, and then the next night I wasn't.
So how do you know your stomach lining had repaired?
Because of the no acid being coughed up, Mark.
I don't know. That's a
See, that's so
pathology.
dishonestly dismissive to do that. Why do you do that?
Well, so
very,
I'm
very dishonest right now.
No, I'm just imagining myself in that situation.
No, you're not.
Right?
That's the problem, Mark, is that you're not. You're not
No, I
appreciating
am.
the situation.
Okay, just hear me out. Just hear me out. So I'm
I wish
imagining
you would
myself.
hear me out on this, really.
No, I'm listening. I really am, and I'm not saying that. Hey, so what I'm doing is saying, how do we know it is what you're saying it is, or how would I know it is what you're saying it is?
But we're
And
taking,
look, I get.
Mark, listen to me for just a second. Acid reflux
Right.
is something that you recover from gradually by things like change in diet, lower levels of stress, and change in medication. It is not something that changes overnight, Mark. It is completely unreasonable for you to assume that I, by an act of faith, in one night, stopped experiencing symptoms that were so dramatic and didn't go through that process, didn't go through any of the factors that even lead to the process that I didn't go through. And then the effect the very next night after the alleged act of faith happened. For you to say that I should have no confidence in that kind of coincidence is ridiculous. It's very dismissive.
I didn't say you should have
You
no
certainly
confidence.
suggested it. Yes, you did.
I'm saying I don't have confidence
Because it didn't happen to you, Mark. That's the difference. If it would have
Yes,
happened
I
to you,
understand
you
that.
would have thought more about it.
But what I said at the start of this is I'm interested in the epistemology, how you know this, because you're claiming sort of this certainty that this is what happened.
I don't
And
think
whenever
I don't think that's right. I'm saying that to me, that faith-based position appears to be what led to that. And I've had that experience repeated in so many different ways in life that my level of confidence in this way of life has been built up. That's not the same way of saying that you know something. I'm making the same case that a scientist would make. I'm saying to the best of my knowledge, this seems to be the true answer.
Yeah, and I'm sort of saying that when we put faith in something and you use that faith and in sort of a ritualistic way, that when you put faith in something, pray, and you go through this behavior, when you only count the hits and not the misses, it will bias you. This is what I believe. It will bias you to thinking that that is the cause of the effect instead of, it's basically confirmation bias.
I would
What it
agree with
is.
you. There's many instances where things are minor or where things could possibly happen that way anyways, to where a person's confirmation bias could push them over one way or the other. But there are also extreme situations where confirmation bias is not that big of an issue. Acid reflux stopping overnight is an extreme situation. You're simply refusing to appreciate that.
Well, I've got no way to know that it happened overnight, and I don't see how
Do you think
you
I'm
can...
lying to you?
No, I don't. But I think you could be mistaken. I think that
I'm mistaken.
you have...
I wasn't coughing up acid the next night. Does that sound like a
No,
reasonable...
I'm not saying that. But you've sort of described your stomach lining repairing in one day.
No, I'm
And
simply
as
saying
far
that
as I...
it is stomach lining that causes the effects that I was experiencing, and it is a rebuilt stomach lining that causes the reparation of those effects. And I did not go through that process. The time was not passed. The necessary changes were not made. It was an overnight thing with no changes. That is not the way that disease is healed, and it happened to be the very night that I prayed about it.
I'm not sure that acid reflux is it's the stomach lining that's causing it. I don't think that's
No, the
the
stomach
case.
lining
So
being deteriorated is something that happens because of acid reflux.
right. Yes,
No,
I
it doesn't
understand
cause
that.
acid reflux. It's sort of part of the process. But my point is, it is not the kind of thing that goes away overnight. And even if you do go through the process of repairing it, and it is a process, there are certain changes that are made that cause that to be repaired. And so it's not the kind of thing that changes overnight. And so when you have that in conjunction with the fact that that's the very night that I prayed about it, then you get a very strong correlation that overrides seeming confirmation bias. And I don't think you're appreciating that.
And you didn't pray for it to go away any other night?
No, just that night. I remember it like
Just
it was
that night. Okay, but I'm not 100% sure that I can say, well, because you stopped coughing, that your stomach lining had repaired itself. I'm not sure I can say that confidently. I don't know enough
Well, no, of
about
course
it.
not, because you didn't go through it, Mark. That's what I started the conversation
Okay.
out with. Experiences really do make all the difference here.
So, yeah. And so, yeah, I'm skeptical. I am skeptical. I don't know how else to sort of say it. I'm skeptical that.
But I think you're unreasonably skeptical. If you got down tonight,
why?
well, let me explain. If you got down tonight and you were like, Lord,
Mhm.
if you're up there, give me an ice cream. And then the very next day, some random person handed you an ice cream, you would go pray again. You would.
Yeah, possibly. I would definitely go pray again and for other things.
Like that, Mark. It was a series of events like that.
But the problem is that if I started to get events that I prayed for that didn't come true, I would start to say, hey, maybe that was just random coincidence that was like, incredibly
what were
rare.
the events that I prayed for that didn't come true that should persuade me that it was confirmation bias?
I don't know, but you just said there was lots of things you prayed for that didn't come true.
No, I didn't say that. I said there have been people in the past who have prayed for things and those things didn't happen.
So everything you've prayed for has come true.
This is what you have to pause right here because this is what I meant earlier when I said that there's no way for me to put into words what it means to have an experience with God. There's a difference in getting down and saying a repetitious prayer versus praying in the Spirit. A person knows when they're in the Spirit, and that gives you an added level of confidence in that prayer. So with you not having experienced the Spirit of God, the conversation does sort of hit a brick wall because there's a difference in just praying for the sake of hoping and wishing and then praying because you feel an unction in the Spirit. Every time I've prayed where I felt that spiritual unction, that has come to pass. So I do know the difference from experience, but I don't think I could explain that to you because you haven't experienced it. That's what I meant earlier.
Well, if that's the case, we should be able to make some sort of prediction based upon the things that you pray when you're in the Spirit kind of thing. We should be able to get a hit rate. If you're saying you have 100% certainty, then you should be able to keep a diary and sort of put a blog up, maybe, sort of saying, "Hey, I prayed for this tonight," and then the next day.
Testimonials are, Mark.
But you're saying that you have 100% hit rate
when you feel the spiritual unction to gravitate towards something. That's different. It's so hard to explain because you don't believe in spirits, and if you had these experiences, you would be left with no option but to believe in spirits because there's no more belief required. You've experienced spiritual things, and so you can't go back to a time where you haven't experienced that.
Well, you say that, but what you've described wouldn't sway me.
Right,
I'm really sorry, but it just wouldn't.
It would, though. If you went through what I went through, it would.
I don't know. I don't know because I don't know what you went through.
I'm glad that you've toned it down to I don't know. I think that's more reasonable than it would not.
I said I don't think so.
Well, you started out with it would not persuade me, and then you changed it to I don't know.
Well, I think for some of the specifics, it wouldn't persuade me. That event wouldn't persuade me. But then you said you don't know.
Reflux disease would have persuaded you for sure.
I'm not sure it would. No,
I know you're not sure of it, but that's different.
No, I don't.
I know that it wouldn't.
I don't think it would. So this is.
I don't think you're being honest when you say that. I really don't.
Well, I am. I mean, I don't know why you're sort of accusing me of dishonesty. I do get a lot of. Well, hang on. Let me finish. I do get a lot of people, especially Christians, saying you're going to believe this and you're going to believe that, and if you did this, you would believe it too. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. People think differently and people believe different things, and I would like you to respect what I believe. I'm doing you the courtesy of respect.
Are you doing me that courtesy, Mark?
Yes.
You're saying that you're doing me that courtesy, but you're so utterly dismissive of these very meticulous examples that I'm giving. That's not a very nice.
I don't believe that it comes from a God.
Well, I know that you don't believe that, but my case to this is the reason you don't believe that is because you did not go through that experience. And when I gave you the little anecdote about the ice cream, you said, yeah, I'd probably pray again, which means you probably would have reacted the way that I reacted.
Right.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I would believe it was from a God. And as I clarified, if things that I prayed for didn't come true, then I would sort of say, hey, it's probably just coincidence. I don't know how else I'm supposed to sort of explain that. And I do not doubt you had an experience, Christian, right? I know that you had an experience and quite a significant experience in your life. I am not convinced it comes from a God, and I am raising my objections to your claims that it did come from a God because I've got no way to know that. But when
Well,
you
I
say,
think
hey, hold it, let me finish. When you sort of say, hey, if you went through what I went through, you would believe, how do you possibly know how my mind would react to going through an experience? How would you know that?
because it's a supernatural experience, Mark. An individual's personality or an individual's tendencies are strong, and it's true that the mind reacts differently. I don't contest that at all. But there are some things, it's almost like a car crash. If you have a car crash, whether you're a simple minded person or an analytical person, whatever kind of person you are, it shakes you up. There are some things in life that are so big and imposing that they supersede our individual personalities. And so these kind of experiences are not so much subject to the individual who's experiencing them as much as that individual is subject to the experience. So that's what I mean by that. I think that kind of experience is big and powerful enough that an individual's different brain chemistry or different personality or upbringing wouldn't be enough to push out the obviousness of it.
Yeah, but you don't know how I would
None of us
react
know
to that.
anything. We're talking about what we believe.
Right. But sort of, and you, and I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but you do not understand how my mind works, and I don't understand how yours works. I am neuroatypical. My mind works differently than yours. If you are indeed neurotypical,
I don't know.
yeah. So there are things that I can do, and things that, and somebody said, yes, autism is my superpower. Yes, absolutely. I forget who that was, but yes, you're correct. There are things that I can do that neurotypical people cannot do, and there are things that neurotypical people can do that I can't do. So I don't think anybody has the I mean, you can believe whatever you want. That's fine. I mean, I don't believe I would react in the same way that you are suggesting. I think that I would go to patterns and sort of logical inference and things like that rather than placing faith. So I think we'd be coming at it from two completely different directions.
I don't
So
doubt that, but I do think that those kind of experiences are just a little bit bigger than individual personality differences. And obviously, I'm not saying that I know that. I'm saying I believe that. I believe that if you had an illness comparable that requires a certain process or a certain change in behavior over a period of time to repair itself, and then you prayed and the very repaired, that's going to have a profound impact on you regardless of your psyche.
well, sure, it would be a significant event, but I don't think I would necessarily take it as a supernatural event. I don't think that's the case.
If you had prayed for it to happen,
Correct.
see, I don't believe that. I don't think you're telling the truth.
Really?
I don't really.
I don't know what to say to that. You've just said that I'm lying.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to accuse you of lying. I'm just being honest. If a
Well,
person, well, let me finish.
the
If a person has just said, hey, I prayed for this thing that doesn't happen overnight, and then the very next
Mhm.
day, overnight, it happened, and then that person's like, oh, yeah, probably coincidence. They're not going to react that way. That's just not true, Mark.
So the key word here is necessarily, right? That necessarily it has to be a cause of that prayer. That I've explained the placebo effect. I've explained all of these things. I've explained how we can have confirmation bias. I've explained all of this. So if I was praying for everything over the course of a year or something, I understand that you will pray for something and it will coincidentally happen. It's not a great stretch. You're sort of saying, hey, you know the difference between a prayer that's going to come true and a prayer that doesn't come true. I don't know that's the case. I think you may just say, hey, the ones that come true, I had a special thing, and the ones that I didn't have a special thing. I see no.
Wouldn't I be privy to if I was deceiving you in that way?
I don't know. Would you be?
I would be privy to that. I would know the difference, and I would know that I was leading you on. So in that case, if I knew the whole thing was a farce, why would I do it to begin with?
Well, I know a lot of people that claim a lot of things, and they have all kinds of powers that they don't have.
So you think I still have acid reflux, Mark?
No, I never said you didn't.
Well, it's just a weird way to word it. Things they don't have that they say they have. I have a situation in life where I no longer have this illness. So I really do have that.
But you're claiming to have the power to will reality to change, or at least plead for reality to change, and you know ahead of time with 100% certainty, no less, of that you will get that these things will happen, you are claiming
That's not
foreknowledge.
exactly what I claimed. What I claimed was that I needed a certain thing to transpire in life because I was in a position of desperation, such as the acid reflux.
Right.
That situation is a hard thing to resolve. There's a medical process to resolve it. So we know that. I know you don't want to concede that right now, but it's true. So I took a step of faith and I said, okay, well, God, can you please help me with this? And in that particular step of faith, I felt the spiritual unction to actually believe it. And then the very next day, it was resolved. That is a very, very specific situation that does have an effect on people. And it's not that you would be like the one person that didn't care. You would care if it was you.
Well, of course I would care, but the whole point is that you are claiming that these specific prayers that you know ahead of time that they are the prayers that are going to be fulfilled will get fulfilled. That is foreknowledge.
Sure. Well, when you say no, that's an interesting way of phrasing it. You feel a special unction in moments to have a particular confidence in a prayer, and those are the ones
Yes.
that get answered.
So you know ahead of time through this unction. You said it was an unction.
I think unction's a good word for it. Yeah.
Okay, this unction, that prayer, the prayer that you're making right now that says, hey, I will have this happen to me, or this will be cured, or what have you, will be fulfilled at some point in the future, in the near future, I presume.
Sure.
Right? So why is that not foreknowledge, that you would be able to predict the future using that?
I don't think that's exactly the same thing as foreknowledge, but if that's the way that you want to term it, I have no problem with conceding that.
Well, you're claiming to have 100% accuracy
Well,
about this.
you don't understand what I'm saying, Mark. I'm saying there is a certain experience that a person has to where they feel a special confidence in a moment of need. And it's different than just praying for something because you want it. It's a different experience. It's not knowing in the same sense of saying, well, I've seen this in a vision, but it's just, I feel that special spiritual confidence right now. I can tell, like as Christians often word it, the golden scepter is right now, ask what you will, it's out. In that instance, there is something inside of you that feels more of a confidence to where you're praying and believing. And those are the ones that seem to be answered. And so there's a difference in just saying something because you want it or because you desire it versus feeling that unction and feeling that special level of confidence, because the Bible says when you pray, believe. And most of the time when people pray, they don't believe. But in those instances, something happens and you do believe.
So my problem here is I find it difficult to believe that every single time, without fail, 100% certainty that when you feel this unction ahead of time, that everything that you've ever prayed for comes true.
It hasn't been that many times, Mark, in my life. I've only been serving the Lord for about 13 years. And probably over that 13 years, I've had 8, 9, maybe 10 experiences like that. And maybe even 1 or 2 less than that. It hasn't been frequent. There's just instances where, and it's like, I can't explain to you because you're not a Christian, but there's instances where you know the difference and you feel there's something in you that has a confidence in what you're asking instead of just hoping and wishing, that you just feel confident in it. And that's why the author recorded when you pray, believe. That would have been a silly thing to write down if there was no difference. He wrote down when you pray, believe. And so sometimes that comes over you and you really do believe. And that is what makes the difference, is belief.
So what's your sample size for these unction prayers? What's the sample size we're looking at here?
If I've had 8, then it's 8. And if the people I know have had 8, then it's 8 with them.
So 8 times. Your sample size is 8.
You understand what I'm saying? Everybody that I know in the Christian community who has had experience with God, who understands who God is, will tell you, like I'm telling you, that there is a difference in those moments and that those are the prayers that get answered. So it's not a matter of, like, you can't really type this out into statistics because God is not interested in persuading people like you. You're not on his list.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. I'm good with that. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I'm really sorry, Christian. I just, it's sort of, it sounds very much like wishful thinking to me. But you're welcome to believe anything that you want. It just sounds sort of like, yeah. I don't know where to go from that. Okay, let's go on with that. I'll do these questions. I'm not going to take any more because I've taken up enough Christian's time. If you were convinced for some reason tomorrow that Christianity wasn't true, would that have a negative effect on your life?
That's not really a hypothetical I can entertain. That would be
Okay.
like if I asked you if you were convinced that the world was flat tomorrow. You know too many things. There's no way you could be convinced of that.
I could say that if I was convinced that the world was flat tomorrow, it would have a negative effect on my life. I could say that.
I mean, I guess that question has got to be hypothetical in the greatest possible sense of the word, because I don't
sure,
think
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's any more possible for me to be convinced against Christianity than it is for you to be convinced that the world's not a globe or oblate spheroid. But so if I had to hypothetically answer the question, of course it would make my life worse. I mean, I don't see how losing confidence in a creator and losing confidence in an afterlife would make a person's life any better. So I don't know. I mean, to me, it's just one of those nonsensical questions. It's like earlier when you said, can God make a stone so heavy he can't carry it? That I think of this question the same way. There is no possible circumstance where I don't believe in God. So I just don't think it's a serious question.
Well, that's sort of that to me is strange to say, because I don't hold anything as having sort of absolute knowledge of anything. I think the only thing that I can say I have absolute knowledge is that reality exists. I think everything else is subject to fallibility. Like there's problems getting to a foundation for knowledge on anything. So I kind of so I can be convinced of anything given enough evidence and sort of thing. It sounds sort of, I mean, I don't want to be rude, but it sounds
No,
sort of
I understand what you're
closed-minded.
saying. I understand what you're saying. It's different though. It's like I said earlier, it is true that things that are based on knowledge are always up in the air. You're always open to new evidence. You're always open to changes in information. Christianity is not based on knowledge. It's based on experience. It's a different basis.
Not based on knowledge, it's based on experience, is just knowledge, like accumulated knowledge through experience. Isn't that?
I don't understand what you're asking.
Well, sort of experiences just give you knowledge about situations in the past, right? Like, isn't that just accumulated knowledge or experiences with things?
No, that's what I'm saying is if you have, like earlier I said car crash. If you have a car crash, you can never unhave that car crash. You had
Right.
that experience. You can learn about it, you can understand it better, but you can't unhave it. When a person has an experience with God, it's like having a car crash. Yeah, you have knowledge about the experience. You develop your knowledge of the experience, but you can never unhave the experience. You can't go back to a time before you had the car crash. And it's not possible to go back to a time before you had an experience with God. Once you've experienced God, he's real. There's no going back from that.
Yeah, and nobody's saying you haven't experienced the car crash, but what we're sort of saying is that how, like, you're saying that you can never be convinced that the car crash was anything other than this thing that you believe it is. And what I'm saying is that people have been wrong about what caused a car crash and who was to blame and things like that, the details of it. So nobody's saying that the experience isn't valid and you've had, everyone believes that you've had the experience. What I don't believe is where the experience came from, that you're sort of saying it was a supernatural truck that hit your car or something.
No, when I say car crash, I'm not saying that the car crash is the experience like of a healing or something like that. I'm saying the car crash is the experience of coming in contact with God. So I think that your analogy is perfectly fine if I was equating the car crash with the experience that I gave God credit for, like the healing or whatever. I'm saying that the car crash is coming to know the Lord itself.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure I would sort of support that analogy.
I would expect not.
Well, it's just your evidence isn't really meeting a God. It's the prayer and the so now we've sort of gone on to meeting the God itself rather than the events surrounding it. So I see that sort of as a shifting of the goalposts, that you've sort of said, well, these events make me certain because I did this, prayed, and this happened, kind of thing.
That's
And now
not the series of events that I gave you. When you asked me to give my testimony, I started out that I had an experience with God, and then I began seeking him. So there was an initial contact with a supernatural force that started my journey, which was the reason that I took the steps of faith after the fact to start having the natural experiences such as the healings, etc.
Well, you said you put in faith first. Actually, I'm a little confused about events now.
I don't remember exactly how I worded it, but the way that it actually happened was that you have an experience where you meet the Lord. I know that doesn't mean anything to you, but you have an experience where you meet the Lord, and that causes you to step out of the boat, so to speak. It causes you to believe that there's a possibility that this step of faith could lead to something else. So the initial thing is meeting the Spirit of God. That's the initial thing.
Yeah, I would have to rewind it because I could have sworn that you said that you met some people from this old church who were very lovely and respectful and very conservative and had an aura about them, kind of thing. And then you put faith, you read the Bible, then put faith in the way the Bible was saying or what to do in the Bible.
Well, my experience with the Lord came after I read the book of Matthew. So no, you're not entirely wrong. I did meet the people at the campground, and I did read the book of Matthew. And when I went into the woods, I don't remember if it was the next week. I don't remember now if it was a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but it was less than a month. But I went into the woods to go camping like I always did, and I had an experience with God while I was in the woods. And so, yeah, you're right. There were certain preceding events, but it really wasn't because I was going camping anyways. It is true that those things happened before I had the experience, but the experience itself wasn't totally, I don't know, it's kind of disconnected. My point is, when a person has that experience, that's what causes the person to begin expressing themselves through acts of faith, because that experience leads them to believe that there's some benefit to acts of faith.
Well, Christian, hold on a second. That's a huge detail to leave out of a conversion story, isn't it? You went into the woods and met God. Well, yeah, I don't remember you saying that you went into the woods and met sort of God face to face kind of thing. I don't
think I said face to face. That's a bit of a detail.
Okay, so how did you meet God then? What does that entail?
There's no point in me trying to explain that. Suffice it to say that I experienced
all right.
the Word of God.
Maybe I do apologize if I missed it.
I can't imagine I left it out, but if I did, I'm sorry. There was a situation.
No, it's okay.
The series.
I'll rewatch it and find out if I'm stupid or not.
Yeah, honestly, no, I don't remember. You may be right, but you may actually be right, Mark, because a lot of times when I'm talking to an atheist, I will gloss over that because that doesn't mean anything to them.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just move. I'm so sorry. I'm keeping you so long. I do apologize.
No, you're not bothering me. I appreciate the time.
Christian, how many amputees have been healed by prayer?
I don't know the number.
This was from Big Bad Mama.
I mean, I don't know the number of that, obviously. I believe the number to be much higher than 0, of course.
Okay. And from who was it? Blaster Master again. Oh, you're a shocker. I can pray to my toaster oven with the same reliability as his God. What does that say about his God?
Did your toaster oven cure a disease overnight? Probably not, right?
I don't know. I'll ask him.
Yeah, see if he's got an opinion on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've all got opinions on everything, I think. So does he pray for things he does not believe will come true?
Yes.
So do you pray for... Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think everybody does, to be honest with you. A lot of times when you're praying, in the back of your mind, you don't really mean it.
Well, I mean, I haven't prayed a lot. That's the thing. Like, people have asked me to pray and sort of shared prayer with me. Probably, I'd say over a dozen times in my life. But sort of always is this promise: it's going to touch me, it's going to do this for me, it's going to do that, and it's going to come true, and it's going to change my world, and I'm going to have this experience, and it just hasn't. So I've gone into things with a open mind, and Blastermaster says yes with the same reliability as God. Yeah, all right, very witty, very witty.
Over example after example where you're wrong about that. So that's the issue. It's easy to make snarky comments when you're not the one debating, but I don't think that you've ever prayed to your toaster and had something happen overnight that doesn't happen overnight the next day. So I don't think it's the same reliability. That's a very foolish thing to insert into the conversation.
I think they're just pointing out that if you had faith in that, then you could believe that your toaster can do anything. So you could say, hey, I'm praying to my toaster, and if it comes true, then it was the toaster. I think
That's a
that's what he's
hypothetical.
getting
We're
at.
speaking of something that actually happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, Blaster Master, pray to your toaster and see if any of them come true. Go
And
for
report
it.
back to us.
Yeah, but I mean, if you pray enough to the toaster, something's got to come true, right?
Probably not a supernatural healing overnight,
How do you know it's supernatural?
because it was abnatural. That's what supernatural means.
Well, yeah, but sort of, diseases spontaneously clearing up isn't
Yeah, it always just
technically
spontaneously
supernatural.
blew up. Unbelievably
Yeah.
dismissive.
Well, I mean, I think it's just I work on evidence and reason. So
Evidence maybe, but not completely on reason.
no, absolutely. So a lot of these things we're sort of getting into are logical fallacies, like the Texas sharpshooter, like confirmation bias, like all of these fallacies that I'm bringing up. That is what it means.
I'm aware of
to be
those
rational.
fallacies. Those exist on paper.
Yeah.
We're talking about stuff that really happened in the real world, Mark.
They exist on paper. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Really happened. Like, it's
Yes,
easy
no,
to
I understand
say
that.
that, but those things did not happen to you, Mark. It's
Do you
totally
think rationality only applies to what's written down?
I think that when you say you're a rational person, that's in stark contrast with your amount of dismissiveness of some of these examples. And there's obviously tons more.
Well, I know that it seems like that to you, and I get that,
Not just
that
me.
you absolutely believe it's true. But as you've said, I haven't had the experiences you do. So to me, what you've given me is anecdotal evidence, which isn't particularly strong,
No, it
especially
is
when there can
literally
be
anecdotal evidence. Yes.
other reasons why these things could have happened. And see, what a skeptical mind will do and what a rational person will do is they won't exclude any possibility if they don't know for sure. Like, just because these things have happened, I wouldn't exclude other possibilities. And it's okay, like, you can do that. But I don't think it's fair to say that I'm irrational for saying that.
I don't think that a rational person would be that dismissive when a situation is that particular. I think a rational person would say, well, maybe you're onto something. I'll consider that. You were immediately
Really?
dismissive.
So if an Islamic person told you roughly the same thing, you would believe them?
I would certainly not immediately dismiss it. I'm a rational person.
You would not immediately dismiss it.
Of course not.
So if somebody told you that they
Would
had all
you?
these experiences that fairies caused, would you believe it?
If that individual said that I had a disease that healed overnight because that night
Yeah.
I prayed to fairies, it would get my attention. The problem with that, Mark, is that they're not saying that. They are saying that about the Christian God, though.
It would get your attention. Sure. Okay. So it gets your attention.
A rational person.
Well, yeah, but they are saying it about crystals and all kinds of stuff. So let's focus on that for a second.
Who
Why
is
don't
saying
you
that
believe
crystals
them?
healed their disease overnight? See, I think that's one of those things that you guys just say and don't really have any examples.
People do sort of say in the
These
healing
people
power of
somewhere
crystal.
somehow.
Yeah. So all I've got from you is sort of anecdotal evidence that isn't particularly strong. It's perfectly rational to say, hey, I don't doubt you had an experience. I don't believe it's a God. Do I believe that no God could have possibly done it? No. I don't know.
I think you
whether
do
a God
believe
did.
that. I think you do take the position that nobody could have possibly done it.
I think it's highly I think the chances of that happening are so highly unlikely. And I don't even believe a God exists. So how would I put a God into the picture there?
You said the chances of it are highly unlikely, but when the chances of
Sure.
stage 4 lung cancer going into remission on its own were highly unlikely, you were like, yeah, it was probably just that.
Yeah, but in some
That's
way,
crazy dismissive.
a mind would have to exist minus a brain, in some way existing in some sort of ethereal plane that we can't even detect, that somehow comes down to cure your acid reflux because you asked nicely in a certain way that made sense and was significant to you.
As opposed to what? As opposed to the laws of nature were suspended for
Hang
no
on a
reason?
second. Because you're a special person that has been pre-selected by this being that nobody can find, because you have been predestined to in some way worship this being after you die. And that, as opposed to an acid reflux naturally cleared up.
Well, it didn't naturally clear up. That's the problem. You're not framing it honestly. It cleared up.
Well, how do you know it's supernatural? You've got no evidence that it's supernatural.
Mark, you're sitting there saying that the laws of nature were suspended for no reason as opposed to for a reason. Your argument is that they were just suspended willy-nilly, and my argument is that they were suspended for a reason. Both of us are saying they were suspended.
No, I don't think the laws of nature were suspended. You've got no evidence that the laws of nature were suspended. You have a belief that
So
the
you're
laws of
arguing
nature
that
were
acid
suspended.
reflux disease just clears up overnight willy-nilly. That's your position.
No, I didn't. Yeah, so I don't think that is sort of accurate. I think that things do clear up, and
Overnight.
I'm not convinced it was overnight. Well, the actual claim was that your stomach lining repaired overnight, but I know for a fact that you have not investigated that claim to see if that is actually true. I know you didn't take a biopsy sample before and after your claim. I know that's the case. You just believe it.
You actually don't know that, but I will concede that.
Okay, did you?
No, in this instance, I did not, but you didn't know that until I just said it.
Right.
So it's weird to say that you know it. But the point is, we do know as a medical fact that these things happen because of a long period of time of experiencing acid reflux disease, and that the stomach acid coming up in your throat at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning is because the stomach lining has been weakened and different things have happened. So the fact is, all the things that happened because of that went away. So it's perfectly reasonable to assume that there was effect on the things that caused those things to happen in the first place. That's not irrational, that's rational.
But we're not saying that the acid reflux, because you don't know that the acid reflux went away quickly. You're saying the symptoms went away quickly. And it can be, a stress can be a cause of acid reflux. And sort of so that I
clear up overnight, Mark. That's the point you're downplaying.
Well, the symptoms went away overnight.
It seems radical for you to take this position to me. I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of the things.
I'm not being radical. You're being radical in suggesting that a supernatural being came down and miraculously did this overnight. That's the radical part.
Because of the specific circumstances, Mark. That's what you keep leaving out.
Sure.
It was a supernatural being that I petitioned, and something that doesn't clear up overnight did clear up overnight, and it cleared up that night.
So this is what I'm talking about. This is begging the question, right? So when you start off from making an argument and you're already assuming the conclusion, right? So when we say, okay,
you're the one doing it.
Okay, stop. So why did the stomach acid clear up overnight? You're saying I prayed to a supernatural being. Now, that is begging the question. It's saying, hey, I already know the cause of this happening. I'm not going to investigate. I know the cause of this happening, and I'm going to lead around to that conclusion. When I'm saying what caused the stomach acid to clear up, I don't know. But there are natural explanations and there's supernatural explanations. And I'm asking you why supernatural explanations are necessarily the best explanation.
It cleared up overnight, Mark, and it cleared up that night. So not only does it not clear up in one night, it doesn't clear up in 1 week, and it cleared up that night that I prayed, Mark. That's what you keep overriding. You're the one being radical here.
No, absolutely not. I'm being absolutely rational because you're... No, I am. Absolutely.
You haven't said one time, oh my God, acid reflux disease cleared up in one night with no treatments and no change in diet. You haven't one time acknowledged that that is a radical thing that happened.
It is an amazing thing to happen, but people's acid reflux, as somebody in the chat saying, I have chronic acid reflux. It comes and goes. So it stops overnight.
That's not what it comes and goes means, Mark. I had acid reflux for years. I know what they mean when they say that. It don't mean what you just said. See, that's another thing with the experience. You don't have the experience of dealing with acid reflux like I do, so you just don't know what you're talking about.
So they're basically saying the cough stopped, not
no,
the
they're saying
reflux.
that those symptoms progressively get better and worse over time. I know what they mean by that. And they don't mean that a certain symptom happening every night like clockwork goes away overnight. That's not what they mean by that. I've been through what they're talking about. And the difference in me and you, Mark, in this situation is that I know what they're saying.
So I would, in order to believe that was a supernatural event, I would have to have some kind of medical professional. The problem is that you have not investigated this to be supernatural. You are assuming on the outset it is supernatural,
Well, I
and
know
not
it's
something
supernatural, but we're talking
natural
about
that is just highly unlikely or incredibly improbable. You have assumed the conclusion up front, and that is begging the question, which is a logical fallacy. So I am not being the one irrational here. I am saying, hey, I have no reason to believe it was a supernatural event. And I'm asking you how you know, how you justify that supernatural event as opposed to a natural one.
Because
And
that
you're,
would
you're
convince you, Mark. If I had done that, if I had the medical records and I had them, you would find another way to defer from it, because it's not information that you're looking for. You're looking to dispel the possibility of a God.
no,
Yes, you are.
no.
That if I had all those records, like the guy with lung cancer actually does, if I had all those records, that would not convince you, Mark. This is why I say
Oh,
people.
so the guy with the lung cancer does. He has the medical records to back him up.
He has the scans before and after the X-ray scans.
No,
And
no, he's got the medical records that this could not
do you,
have
do you
possibly
not
happened
think
under
X-
any.
you don't think that X-ray scans and doctor's notes and life expectancies, medications recommended, you don't think those are medical records, Mark?
Yeah, I think they're medical
Who's
records,
got the
but I
medical
think that
records?
people, but I think that people, as you've acknowledged, that don't pray, that have these incredible recoveries, and you haven't accounted for that. You ignore that completely, just as you ignore all the people that pray and basically die. This is the thing. It is simply confirmation bias. Every time this happens, you say, hey, that was a God that did it, without noticing any of the times where it notoriously fails. Nothing fails like prayer. Like I brought up the studies they have done on prayer and its ineffectiveness to actually change things in the real world. And you just dismissed it offhand,
Mark,
claiming that somehow you
the
could
way you
tell.
feel about me on that is how dismissive I think you're being on the particular situations that we've discussed. And as I'm sure you know, there's a
Well,
long.
that's okay. You can dismiss it if you want, but then you don't get to turn around and say, well, you're being irrational.
But Mark, it is irrational when somebody is telling you, hey, this really strange,
No.
unusual thing happened, and it happened with this coincidence in mind, and you're like, oh yeah, it's probably nothing. That is irrational, Mark.
No, I didn't say it was nothing. I
You
said that you
effectively
don't
said it's
have,
probably
you
nothing.
don't have, excuse me, you don't have enough justified evidence to show that it was a God.
Mark, but I'm not
You're
trying
saying this
you want-
coincidence happened, right? This coincidence happened. You're saying it is necessarily a God that did it.
I
And I'm
didn't
saying, hey,
say that, Mark. Those are your words. I'm telling you, this is why I believe that's what it was. I have no expectation of convincing you. You're the kind of person that's against being convinced. I'm simply saying that's why I believe that.
well, I'm not against being convinced, but what I would like is for you to acknowledge that to me, that's insanely weak evidence.
But
And
Mark,
I don't
why don't
understand
you
why
acknowledge
you
the
believe
same
it.
thing in the reverse and say, yeah, Christian, that's pretty darn strange. I'd look into that too.
Because if it was me, I wouldn't think that's automatically a God.
You can't possibly say that, Mark.
Well, from what you've described, if it was me, I don't think I would think that it's a God.
I don't think that you could really say that.
Well, I don't. I think that on both of us, I would have a better sense of what I would think than you do when it comes to my thoughts.
But we both acknowledge that we don't know how we're going to react to certain experiences that we haven't been through. So no, you don't know what you think in that situation.
Correct. But only one person is saying there is no possible way I could be convinced otherwise.
I don't even think I worded it like that, Mark. I just said I'm approaching it the same way scientists approach things. This is most likely what happened based on what I know about it. Scientists don't prove things. They prove things beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, the question was like, if you did not believe in a God, would your life be affected or in a negative way? And you sort of said there is no, I can't even comprehend that possibility. Like it just isn't something that you could envisage or sort of formulate it. I'm paraphrasing. I can't find the exact.
Yeah, that is what I said. Yeah. But that'd be like me saying, "Hey, Mark, have you ever been on the internet?" What if I told you you'd never been on the internet? You can't even imagine that. That's silliness.
Yeah, I can, sure.
See,
What are you
like
talking
stuff
about?
like
Of course
that,
I
you're
can
not really
imagine that.
being intellectually honest. You're not acknowledging the
Well,
ridiculousness of it.
yeah. You know, there was a time where there was no internet, right?
Right, but you've been on the internet, Mark. You have.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Have you never been on the internet, Mark?
Have I never been on the internet? No.
That's how that question sounds to me. I have had an experience with God, so there is no not believing in him. You have
But
been
I
on
can
the internet.
but I can entertain the hypothetical that during my life I had never been on the internet. I can look at all of the things that I have, or at least envisage the things that I have learnt on the internet and say, what would it have been like to not learn them or have to learn them in a much slower
If
way
that was
through
the question,
friends?
that's not really the way the question was framed, but if that was the question, I can answer that. The answer to that question would be my life would have been worse had series of events led to where I never came to know the Lord because I was just on track to having a miserable, depressed life. That's, one of the whole reasons I was happy that I found him in the first place.
Well, I mean, all he's asking is like, if you deconverted, would your life be negative,
There
right?
is no
I could.
such thing as deconversion, I don't believe. If it's purely hypothetical and we're saying if you some way, somehow didn't believe in God, would your life get worse? The answer is yes.
Okay, and that's fine. It's just it boggles my mind because I can go, okay, if I believed in God, what would my life look like, right? And I'd probably be part of a church and going to this thing, and my life may actually be a lot more community focused. I may even be a happier person, right? I can say that honestly. I try to be as honest as possible, and I can say that I would probably be a happier person if I believed in a God and just thought that this world was all pre-planned out with nothing to worry about. But I'm not interested. I am interested in what is real. I would rather take a hard truth than an easy lie. And that's not saying it's a lie. I'm saying I would
I
rather
understand the
know.
position you take.
Yes. So I'm not interested in what makes me happy. I'm interested in what makes me well, and knowing what the truth is about reality. And I'm not meaning truth as in what's good for my life. I'm meaning truth as in what is congruent with reality is what makes me a well human being and the best possible chance of humanity surviving in this universe. So I can envisage how my life would be different if I did believe. I'm not sure why that hypothetical could not even cross your mind. It's strange to me.
It wouldn't be an honest answer. I mean, I could say, like, yeah, if for some reason I didn't believe in God, I don't know exactly what direction my life would go, obviously, but I think it would be worse. I think I would be happier believing in God.
Okay.
But it is a hypothetical in the most literal sense because there is no such thing as unexperiencing what you've experienced. You've wore headphones. You cannot go to a time where
Sure.
you haven't worn headphones. That's not possible.
Well, I mean, that's a bit of a weird one,
But it's like
but
that.
well, I would probably imagine, but they're just hypotheticals. It's just, we're talking about, hey, what would my life be like if I was a Muslim? What would my life be like if I was a Taoist? What would my life be like if I was a, Satanist, for instance?
I mean, I
Like,
know what my life was like before I was converted, so I mean, I could speculate on that. It's like I said, it's almost like a foolish question. I could say, okay, well, it'd be this or it'd be that, but it would just be like me
why?
trying to satisfy the questioner because it's just nonsense.
Why?
Because it's not
I mean,
possible.
haven't you ever wondered, like, sort of, if I make these choices, what the consequences and how my life will be different if they
But
turn
that's
out?
not the same thing as what you're saying. It is true that I could go buy a Honda instead of a Toyota, or I could move to Florida instead of Alabama. Things can really happen.
Sure.
That's not the same thing as the question that he asked.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I'm not saying that you should, in order to entertain the question, you should change your beliefs. Certainly not, because I can entertain the question and sort of, not change my belief. And they say the mark of a great mind is to be able to entertain a hypothesis or a hypothetical without believing that. So I can entertain all kinds of things without actually believing it to be true. And sort of, so when people were sort of like, what would convince you that there is a God? And I sort of spell it out for them. It's sort of strange that they can't do the same or even envisage a life without their God.
But I
To
know
me,
what
it seems.
Mark.
Sorry?
It's because of that experience. You're living in a world where your life is dictated on the things that you know. I'm not living in that world. I'm living in a world where my life has been put into a different course, not because of the things that I know, but because of the experiences that I had. So you and I are approaching the question from two very different perspectives, for one. I don't live
Well,
my life based on the things that I know. I know a lot of things, but that's not the central focus of how I order my life.
well, that seems weird to me because, I mean, what we know is all based. You might be using experiences differently, but what we know is all based upon experience. It's all based on what we experience in the past, leading
Yeah,
up
I'm
to
not
now.
speaking of experience in the scientific way. I'm talking about that I had contact with the Spirit of God. That's the experience I'm referring to. I mean, the word experience, like, me and you have done this before with the word truth. Maybe I'm using it different, but what I'm trying to reference is the fact that I came in contact with the Spirit of God and you didn't. And so it would be like you trying to envision a world where you never had headphones on. You do
Well,
have
that's
headphones on.
like I know that you probably don't know you're using it this way, but that's not a fact. It's not something that is evident to like just inherently known, right? So when we're talking facts, when you say that is a fact, you're saying that is known by everybody, right? That is
I don't think I
like
used the word fact.
gravity.
I think you did.
No, you said that the fact is that you came in contact with something.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, it's another one of those things where we're arguing about the definition of a word. I'm telling you that me coming in contact with the Spirit of God is much more persuasive to my life than the things that you would call facts. It's on a much higher level.
Okay.
I mean, I thought that was obvious in the whole conversation. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean that's fine. That's fine. It's just I don't I don't know how that could be construed as rational, like following rationality and the laws of
I
logic
don't
kind
I
of
don't
thing.
claim to follow rationality. I mean, I'm a rational person in the sense that I'm self-aware of these things. I have the ability to
Okay.
be rational.
Yeah, and yeah, I apologize. You did say that
Yeah,
part of
I
it was
willingly
irrational.
spin that. Yes.
Yeah, so part of it definitely was irrational and sort of based on faith. And I guess
Yeah, it's
um
real. It's real. It's just not real because it's one of those things where it's like, I can't concede that because that's not true. It's real. It's much more real than having a car crash, but it's not real to the satisfaction of somebody who has not experienced it. It had much more
okay,
of a profound effect on my
that
life
just
than anything
yeah,
you
that just
real.
so my estimation of reality and what's real and what's not isn't so what you've sort of described is a subjective reality, like
Sure.
what is real to one person can be not real to another, and
Yes.
maybe it's the way that I think about reality is that reality is stance independent. Like it doesn't matter whether I think that rock is there or you think that rock is there. It's just there is a reality if that rock is there or not. Like it's not going to change depending on our perspective.
No, not the
um
rock. I agree. The rock is made of matter. We're speaking of a spirit.
right, a spirit.
It's not really, my point is, it's not quite as comparable as you're making it out to be.
Well, it's just weird that would exist in a reality for you, but it wouldn't exist in reality for me.
That's exactly how I believe it is, though. And the when I say that it's more real, what I'm saying is that, like you, I've had a series of experiences through life, and I've learned a series of things, and I've had the human experience, and I know what it's like to be persuaded by persuasive things. I know what it's like to use logic and rationale based on your experiences and knowledge to make decisions. I'm saying that this other thing is much more persuasive. There is no series of facts. There is no level of knowledge. There is no other experience. It's the only thing I can think to phrase it as is that it's higher, but it's much more persuasive than what you would consider to be real. It has much more of a profound impact on one's life than anything that could be considered real.
Okay, that boggles my mind. I that sort of suggests that you're in a different reality than I am.
I would agree with that. Yes. Me and you are experiencing the world from two very different perspectives. And I guess in a different reality would be a perfectly reasonable way to say that.
Well, I would understand that as
I don't mean it the
a
way that I understand it, though. I mean it the way that I'm saying it. You and I, if we were having the exact same life, we would be seeing it different because one of us would, like, if me and you had completely paired experiences in life, except for this one thing. One of us came in contact with God and one of us didn't. From that point forward, even though we would be experiencing the exact same things, we would be experiencing different things because that one thing has such a profound impact on everything else. So you and I are looking at the world different because I've had that experience.
Well, our perceptions of that thing would be different, right? Our perceptions of that thing would change. But ontologically, metaphysically, that thing would either exist in reality or would not exist in reality, and our perceptions of it may change. So I believe it doesn't exist and you believe it does. But you're confusing epistemology, which is our beliefs and knowledge, with the metaphysical reality of things. So whether that God exists or does not exist, that is a true dichotomy. It either exists or it doesn't exist. And whether it exists or doesn't exist, that has our stance on it, whether we believe or not believe, how we perceive it, has no bearing on that ontological truth. It will either exist or not exist.
Spirits do not exist in matter. So to your satisfaction, it does not exist.
Well, I didn't say in matter.
But that's what existence is: material. Existence is particles. Existence is waves. Existence is physical material.
No, abstracts can exist.
Well, I mean, even with that, even if we're looking at mathematics and things like that, it doesn't exist that way either, because God is not a logic. God is not a reason. God is not a knowledge. That's right. So it doesn't exist. If we're gonna count that as existence, it doesn't exist in that way either.
No, that's fine. Exist just means it has some sort of projection somewhere.
I didn't know that's what we meant by exist. That's fine. We can that way. Yeah.
So what you're talking about with matter is a concrete, right? That is something that has physical form, basically, that has some kind of thing. And in order to interact, to cause all these changes, this thing must exist as I'm using it.
It doesn't exist in that way. Not to the extent of that. I mean, obviously, the materialization of the body of Jesus convolutes that a little bit, but the Spirit of God.
Well, let's leave that out. Yeah.
The Spirit of God does not exist in that sense of existence.
Well, I'm not even restricting it to that sense of existence.
But that's what you're saying you mean by the word exist. So you are kind of restricting it to that.
No, I'm still talking about metaphysically existence. Metaphysical existence. So does it...
I think the word metaphysical in that sense only just means like anything else, kind of like a catch-all for anything outside of these two things. And I mean, that's not really particular.
No, maybe I should get a definition for existence as I'm looking at it. So existence is basically having properties that are instantiated in reality.
Okay, so that would incorporate things like mathematics.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's interesting. I've never heard that definition, which I have to say I've never looked up the definition before. It's not one of those things you usually look up the definition for existence. But now that's a little bit different the way that's worded, because I do believe that the universe is orderly because God is orderly. So I do believe that's a reflection of his inherent nature. So maybe you could say that he exists in the sense that his characteristics are portrayed by the way that reality is organized, if we're going to count that as existence.
How reality is organized, if that counts as existence. So is that sort of a sort of pantheist kind of thing, that all of reality is God kind of thing?
No, it's not that it is God. It's just that it is sort of bearing his characteristics. Like the universe is a clockwork machine. It's predictable. If we get sufficiently advanced in quantum physics, we can predict the universe forward and backwards with perfect precision. So in knowing that, then I think that makes evident the orderly nature of God, and that's the reason that he laid it out that way. So if we're going to consider that a form of existence, that depends on if you're going to qualify that as existence.
Sure, yeah, but that doesn't get to my question of when we say exists, it means that they have properties in actuality. For, like, when you say it exists for me but not for you, that means that those characteristics, and we're in different realities, and that's what I was trying to get at.
Well, I do
where
sort of
that
believe
is-
that too, to be honest with you. I really do believe that. You know, earlier we spoke about what I refer to as divine transology. That's a term that my grandfather coined, but we spoke about translation of the spirit, transformation of the mind, and transfiguration of the body. Well, the first part of that threefold process for perfection is translation of the spirit. So when a person comes in contact with the Spirit of God, their spirit is immediately translated into the kingdom of God, starting the process of transformation of mind, the second step. So in that sense, when you make contact with the Spirit of God and the first part of that threefold process is satisfied and your spirit has been translated into the kingdom of God, you are approaching life from a different perspective than people who haven't had that experience. So I would say that at that point, our realities diverge.
So God would have no impact on my reality at all.
Not in the same way that I'm describing. Like if he allows the course of nature to lead to cataclysmic events, you'll experience those events. But that's not really what I'm referring to when I say experience God personally.
So it sounds like to me that God only exists if you believe and go through this process to make him exist in your reality.
Hold on, let me check my battery real quick. I got 5%. All right, I'm good for 5%, Mark.
Okay.
I can get the
Right,
charge.
well,
I'm going to keep rolling. It's up to you.
No, that's okay. I don't think there's any more questions, and I really have kept you a long time.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I always love to be on your show.
Yeah, it's getting up to almost 4 hours, so I don't want to keep you too long, and I know these videos, but we'll schedule another one, Christian.
Sure.
There's no reason why we can't schedule another one. I know it got a bit spicy, and I was a bit spicy as
No,
well.
man, I enjoyed it. Don't feel bad about that. I love these kind of conversations.
Yeah, but it's just a tail end. We've come out with like we're in different realities. It's kind of I don't know where to go with that one. That's definitely something for a new thing. Like, how many realities are there, and is there personal? Like, because I have heard personal universes before.
I think honestly, I think there's an answer to that question. I think the answer is about 3, but that would be a fun one, honestly. If you wanted, I know you're probably a busy guy and I'm busy too, but if you wanted to get together with that in mind, exploring the idea of a Christian experiencing life from a different kind of reality, because I do believe at the judgment that you will experience the same God that I experienced, but you'll experience him in a different way. So in that sense, our realities would converge for a moment, if that makes sense.
Wow. Okay, that's an entire other section to unpack. Whether how many realities do we actually have? Well, as I said, I have absolute knowledge that at least one reality exists. I don't know about the others.
And go from there.
Well, yeah, I'd say that's probably for the best. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Christian. I'll leave it there, but that's a ton to unpack, and we'll do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I got ugly. I shouldn't have done that.
No, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I like being challenged and sort of, my ideas coming up against some opposition. It's good. It's always good. I am really. I know that Stephen probably said it sort of jovially, but I really was thinking of doing that reverse room rumble where people just come in and hassle me. Yeah. I was actually thinking about but over the last week I've been really ill, so I just a bad flu and cold or something. I don't know. It wasn't COVID. I did the test. It wasn't COVID, but yeah, it was a shocker. So I'm just getting over that. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Christian. I really appreciate it. I know it doesn't sound like it, and I know it sounds like I'm being dismissive. I don't want to be dismissive, but at the same time, I am a skeptic. I'm going to ask hard questions because that's how I operate. So
no, I enjoy it. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I know a lot of times I really do try to keep myself and not lose my temper and stuff. I try in conversations not to do that, and I always get mad at myself if I do. So I appreciate the invitation. I don't want you to think that I don't appreciate being on here.
No, I don't think that at all. That's perfectly fine. And I might do something on that on your grandfather's thing on perfection to follow up. Sure. I only just got into it. But yeah, maybe I can do that as well. I don't know. I'm looking for new stuff to do, and again, I'm trying to get something going on.
Yeah, if you do the whole thing, the thing you were talking about doing the episodes like that, I would love to watch those.
Is it a sketchology? I can't remember the name of it. It's sort of the theology of the end of the world of judgment kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't, all those ologies run together for me. I never went to
Yeah.
seminary or anything, so I don't always remember all that stuff.
Oh, okay. You went to seminary?
No, I never
Oh,
did.
of course, you're a pastor. Oh, you never did.
No, a lot of these
Oh.
guys who use these kind of terminologies, those terminologies are often given in like professional ministry training, which I've never had any of. So I've kind of just had to learn those as I go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the two that I'm really familiar with are eschatology, I think that's how you pronounce it, and that's sort of judgment, and soteriology, which is the around who is saved and who is not saved kind of thing are the two.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to thank everybody so much for joining me. Please, we've had a fantastic conversation. I've got Christian's Church. If you do want to check it out, it's in the comment description. So if you do want more information on it, it is there. Do give a like and subscribe. It really helps me a lot, and I really appreciate every time it does. If you do want to share it, I won't stop you. I really won't jump in front of that bullet. But thank you so much, everybody, and don't forget to be kind to one another and be kind to yourself as well. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right. God bless.